All four of you get in. Those 5 words would one day seal the fate of a family born not from blood, but from defiance. But before Elias McCord could speak them, he would have to choose between his father's empire and a stranger's dream. In the unforgiving Montana territory of 1882, where land meant power and loyalty meant everything, one man's choice to help a desperate woman would ignite a war that would test every bond he'd ever known. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Montana wind carried the scent of autumn, crisp pine dry grass, and the faint metallic promise of early snow. Elias McCord sat tall in his saddle, his 26-year-old frame hardened by years of working land that his grandfather had bled for, that his father now ruled like a kingdom. The leather reins rested easy in his calloused hands as his horse, a steady roan mare named Dusty, picked her way along the fence line that marked the eastern boundary of McCord territory. It was a fence Elias had ridden 100 times, maybe more. Every post, every wire, every stone marker was familiar as his own reflection. But today, something felt different, wrong maybe, or perhaps just unexpected. The old Fitzgerald place sat just beyond the next rise, a sorry collection of weathered timber and broken dreams that had stood empty for near on 2 years. Old Gerald Fitzgerald had tried to make a go of it, tried and failed like so many others who didn't understand that Montana didn't give up her secrets easy. When Gerald died, the land passed to some distant relative back east, someone who'd never bothered to claim it. At least that's what everyone assumed. Elias crested the hill, and his hand instinctively moved to shade his eyes against the afternoon sun. What he saw made him pull Dusty to a complete stop. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, not the wild, dark smoke of an accidental fire, but the thin, purposeful stream of a cook stove being tended. And there, strung between 2 posts beside the cabin, a clothesline sagged under the weight of freshly washed linens, threadbare sheets, and small shirts that flapped in the breeze like surrender flags. But it was the woman who held Elias's attention. She stood beside a wooden washtub, her back to him, wringing out what looked like a child's dress. Even from a distance, he could see the deliberate economy of her movements. No wasted motion, no pauses for rest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung down past her shoulder blades, and she wore a faded blue calico dress that had been mended so many times, it was hard to tell what was original fabric and what was patch. As if sensing his presence, she turned. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. She was younger than he'd expected, early 20s maybe, with a face that would have been pretty if it weren't so gaunt, so carved down to essentials by hunger and hardship. But it was her eyes that struck him. Even at this distance, he could see they were fierce, watchful, the eyes of a cornered animal, deciding whether to run or fight. She reached down without looking away from him, and when her hand came back up, it held a Winchester rifle. She didn't point it at him, didn't need to. The message was clear enough. Elias raised both hands, slowly palms out, keeping them well away from the holstered Colt at his hip. "Easy now," he called out, his voice carrying across the 50 yards between them. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then you best keep riding." Her voice was rough, like she hadn't used it much lately. Or maybe like she'd used it too much, calling for help that never came. "This land's claimed." "Yes, ma'am, I can see that." Elias stayed still in the saddle, letting Dusty shift beneath him but making no move to advance. "I'm Elias McCord. My family's ranch is just west of here. I was riding fence line, saw the smoke. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." "McCord," she said the name like it tasted bitter. The rifle didn't waver. "I know that name." Of course she did. Everyone knew the McCord name. His father had made sure of that. "I don't know what you've heard, ma'am, but I promise you I mean no harm. I'm just a neighbor checking on neighbors." For a long moment she studied him with those fierce eyes. Then from somewhere inside the cabin, a child's voice called out high and frightened, "Clara, Clara, who is it?" The woman. Clara apparently glanced back toward the cabin just for a second. When she looked at Elias again, something in her expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, but complicated. Like she was calculating odds she didn't like. "You can water your horse at the creek," she said finally. "Then you can go." It wasn't an invitation, but it was an acknowledgement. Progress. Elias dismounted slowly, keeping his movements obvious and unthreatening. He led Dusty toward the small creek that ran along the property's southern edge, the same creek that eventually fed into the larger stream running through McCord land. The water here was clean and cold, and Dusty drank gratefully while Elias stood with the reins in his hand, pretending to watch his horse while actually studying the homestead. The cabin was in worse shape than he'd thought. The roof sagged on the north corner, and he could see where someone Clara probably had tried to patch it with old canvas. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and several window panes were stuffed with rags instead of glass. The fence around what might once have been a garden was falling down, though someone had made an attempt to prop it back up with sticks and wire. But there were signs of life of effort. Fresh split firewood stacked against the cabin wall. The garden plot turned over even though it was too late in the season for planting. A chicken coop made from salvaged lumber where half a dozen scrawny hens scratched at the dirt. It was the work of someone determined to survive. Someone who wouldn't give up easy. "How long you been here?" Elias called out, keeping his tone conversational. Clara had lowered the rifle slightly, though it still rested in her hands ready. "Long enough to know we're staying." Didn't mean to suggest otherwise, just making conversation. He let Dusty have another minute with the water, then led her back toward where Clara stood. Close enough now to see the details, the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the shadows under her eyes, the raw determination in every line of her body. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the soft, delicate way of the town girls who practiced their smiles in mirrors. Beautiful like the Montana landscape itself, harsh and unforgiving and absolutely genuine. "I don't need charity," Clara said suddenly, as if she'd read his thoughts and didn't like what she saw there. "And I don't need rescuing. We're doing just fine." "I can see that." Elias kept his voice mild. "That's a good chicken coop. You build it yourself." She blinked, surprised by the question. "My brother Thomas helped. He's 12. Good with his hands." "That's a useful skill out here." Elias glanced toward the cabin, where he could now make out small faces peering through the gaps in the door. "How many are you 4. Me Thomas Mary. She's 9 and little James. He just turned 6. Clara's chin lifted defiantly. "We're family. This was our Uncle Gerald's place. He wrote to our father years back, said if anything ever happened to him, the land should come to us. Well, our parents died of influenza last winter in Ohio. We had nothing left there, so we came west to claim what's ours." Elias did the math in his head. 4 people, 3 of them children, traveling from Ohio to Montana territory. The journey alone must have been brutal, never mind arriving to find a broken-down cabin with winter coming on. "That took courage," he said simply. Clara's expression flickered surprise, suspicion, then something that might have been gratitude before her defenses slammed back up. "Like I said, Mr. McCord, we don't need— I heard you the first time." Elias swung back up into the saddle, gathering his reins. "You don't need charity. I respect that. But I'll tell you something true, Miss Donovan, if that's your name. This land is hard. Harder than anything you've known back east. Winter's coming on, and it comes mean this far north. There's no shame in neighbors helping neighbors. That's just how folks survive out here." "And what would you want in return?" Clara's voice was sharp. "I've met enough men to know nobody does something for nothing." The accusation stung, though Elias supposed he couldn't blame her for thinking it. "What I want," he said carefully, "is for those children to have a fighting chance. What I want is to not ride past here in January and find this place frozen silent." He paused, holding her gaze. "As for what I'd want in return, just knowing I did the right thing. That's enough." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell and turned Dusty back toward home. He'd gone maybe 20 yards when Clara's voice stopped him. "Mr. McCord?" He looked back. She stood with the rifle hanging loose at her side, now the last of the sun catching in her dark hair. "There's coffee," she said quietly. "If you wanted to. If you have time." It was the hardest thing she'd ever said he could tell. Harder than facing down a stranger with a gun. Harder than burying her parents or traveling 2,000 miles with 3 scared children. Asking for help, even disguised as offering hospitality, went against every fiber of her proud spirit. Elias smiled. "I'd be much obliged, Miss Donovan. Thank you kindly." The inside of the cabin was barely warmer than outside, despite the fire crackling in the stone hearth. The space was smaller than Elias had imagined, maybe 15 feet by 20, with a sleeping loft accessible by a rough ladder. Someone had made an effort to clean, to organize, to create the illusion of home. A pair of crates served as a table. Stumps and rocks had been arranged as chairs. Threadbare blankets were folded neatly on rope-strung beds. But it was the children that caught his heart. Thomas stood protectively in front of his younger siblings, a thin boy with Clara's dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Mary peeked around her brother's shoulder, all freckles and hollow cheeks, her dress hanging loose on a frame that should have carried more weight. And little James, barely more than a baby, really clutched a wooden horse so worn that Elias figured it must be the only toy he owned. They all watched him with the same wary hunger in their eyes. Not hunger for food, though God knew they needed that too, but hunger for safety, for certainty, for someone to tell them everything would be all right. "Children, this is Mr. McCord," Clara said, her voice gentler now than it had been outside. "He's a neighbor. He's going to have some coffee with us, and then he'll be on his way." "Ma'am, I don't want to take your—" Elias started, but Clara was already pouring from a battered tin pot into a cracked cup. "We have coffee," she said firmly. "Maybe not much else, but we have that." The coffee was weak, barely more than brown water, but Elias drank it like it was the finest thing he'd ever tasted. Thomas gradually relaxed his protective stance, though he never moved far from his sisters. Mary ventured close enough to study Dusty through the window, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the horse. James stayed glued to Clara's side, one small hand fisted in her skirt. "Your uncle never mentioned having family back east," Elias said carefully, cradling the warm cup in his hands. Not that Gerald was much for talking about personal matters. They had a falling out years ago, before I was born. Clara sat on one of the crates, arranging her skirts with practiced dignity despite the patches and threadbare fabric. "Our father was the younger brother, went east to seek his fortune, as they say. He did all right, owned a small mercantile in Cincinnati. Nothing grand, but honest work." Her voice caught slightly. "The influenza hit hard last winter, took him and Mama within days of each other. I'm sorry for your loss. We sold everything to pay the debts and buy passage west. Took us 4 months to get here, riverboat train wagon train, and finally on foot for the last 30 miles when our money ran out." Clara's jaw tightened. "We arrived in September to find this place barely standing and winter coming on. But the land deed was in Uncle Gerald's lockbox, just like Papa said it would be. This land is ours, legally filed and registered." Elias heard what she wasn't saying, heard the fear beneath the pride. "Has anyone given you trouble about the claim, I mean?" Clara's eyes flicked to his, then away. "A man rode out last week, big fellow, rough-looking, said he worked for someone named McCord and that we were on contested land. I showed him our deed. He laughed and said paper didn't mean much out here without someone to back it up." The coffee turned sour in Elias's mouth. "Big fellow scarred up on the left side of his face, talks like he's chewing gravel. That's him. That's Wade Garrett, my father's foreman." Elias set the cup down carefully, containing the anger that surged through him. "Miss Donovan, I need you to understand something. Whatever Wade said, whatever he implied, he doesn't speak for me. And he's got no legal right to threaten you off land you've claimed proper." "But he speaks for your father." Clara's voice was steady, but her hand had moved to rest on the rifle leaning against the wall beside her. There was no point in lying. "Yes, ma'am. I expect he does." "Then you understand why I was pointing a gun at you when you rode up." "I do." Elias stood slowly, reading the tension that had suddenly filled the small space. Thomas had moved back in front of his siblings, and even little James had picked up on the shift in mood, his eyes wide with fear. "But I also need you to understand that my father and I don't always see eye to eye, especially when it comes to how things should be done out here." "Noble words, Mr. McCord." Clara rose to face him, and despite being half a head shorter, she somehow seemed to match his height through sheer force of will. "But words are cheap. Your father wants this land, doesn't he? That's why his man came out here making threats." Elias couldn't deny it. His father had been talking about the Fitzgerald place for months, about how that creek was the key to controlling water rights for the whole Eastern Valley, about how the land connected their property to the territorial road, about how it was wasted on someone who didn't know how to use it proper. about how it should belong to the McCords. Yes, Elias said quietly. He wants it, but wanting something doesn't make it his. You've got legal claim properly filed. That should be the end of it. Should be. Clara's laugh was bitter. But we both know it won't be, don't we? We both know how this story ends. The rich man takes what he wants, and the poor folks move on or get buried trying to resist. It doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't it? Clara moved to the window, looking out at the land she was trying so hard to hold on to. You seem like a good man, Mr. McCord, maybe even a kind one, but you're also your father's son. When it comes down to it, when he really pushes, whose side will you be on? It was the question that had been haunting Elias for years now, long before Clara Donovan had arrived with her orphaned siblings and her fierce determination. The question of who he was beyond being Henry McCord's heir. The question of what kind of man he wanted to be when the choosing came. The right side, he said finally. Whatever that turns out to be. Clara turned back from the window, and for just a moment, something in her expression softened. I almost believe you mean that. I do mean it. Elias picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the makeshift table. And I aim to prove it if you'll let me. Let me help you reinforce that roof before the snow comes. Let me bring by some supplies, nothing fancy, just practical things you'll need. I told you I don't need charity. Then don't think of it as charity. Elias held her gaze, willing her to understand. Think of it as an investment. I'm investing in having neighbors who'll still be here come spring. Neighbors who might remember that at least one McCord tried to do right by them. Thomas spoke up for the first time, his young voice cracking slightly. Clara, if he's offering help... Hush, Thomas. But Clara's tone was gentler than her words. She studied Elias for a long moment, and he could almost see the calculations happening behind those sharp eyes, weighing pride against survival independence, against the brutal reality of a Montana winter. Finally, she nodded once. The roof needs work. If you've got spare shingles or tar paper, I wouldn't refuse them. But we'll do the labor ourselves. That way it's a trade, not charity. Deal. Elias extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Clara shook it. Her hand was rough with calluses, strong despite its small size. I'll ride back tomorrow with materials, if that's all right. Tomorrow's Sunday. So it is. Family usually expects me for dinner after church. Elias smiled slightly. I'll tell them I have other plans. Won't that cause trouble for you? Probably. He settled his hat on his head and moved toward the door. But I expect I'll survive it. As he swung back up into Dusty's saddle, the three children had crowded into the doorway, alongside Clara, their curiosity finally overcoming their fear. Mary even raised a shy hand in farewell, which Elias returned with a gentle wave. Mr. McCord, Clara called out as he turned to leave. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me that line about doing the right thing. There's got to be more to it than that. Elias considered the question, considered the young woman standing in the doorway of a broken cabin with three children depending on her. Considered the way something in his chest had shifted the moment he'd seen her wringing out laundry with a rifle within reach and determination in every line of her body. Maybe I'm just tired of watching my father take things, he said honestly. Maybe I want to see what happens when someone actually helps instead of grabs. Or maybe... He paused, surprising himself with what he was about to admit. Maybe I just think you deserve a fighting chance, and I'd like to be part of making sure you get one. Clara's expression was unreadable in the failing light, but when she spoke, her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. Then I guess we'll see you tomorrow, Mr. McCord. Elias, he corrected. If we're going to be neighbors, might as well use first names. Elias, then. The corner of her mouth quirked up, not quite a smile, but close. I'm Clara. I know, you told me earlier. He grinned. See you tomorrow, Clara. The ride back to the McCord ranch took the better part of an hour, and Elias spent every minute of it thinking about what he'd just set in motion. His father was going to be furious. Hell. His father probably already knew about the smoke rising from the Fitzgerald place. Judge Henry McCord made it his business to know everything that happened in the valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Elias rode through the gates of the ranch his grandfather had built, the place that was supposed to be his inheritance, his future, his whole damn life, already laid out neat as a Sunday tablecloth. The main house rose 3 stories built from stone and timber hauled down from the high country. Barns and outbuildings sprawled across the compound like a small town unto itself. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, cattle dotted the distant hills, and smoke rose from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands would be settling in for supper. It was beautiful, prosperous, everything a man was supposed to want. But as Elias unsaddled Dusty and saw to her feed and water, all he could think about was that broken-down cabin, those hungry children, and the fierce young woman who'd faced down a stranger with a rifle because she had something worth protecting. "Where the hell have you been?" Elias turned to find his father's foreman, Wade Garrett, leaning against the barn door. Wade was in his 40s, built like a bull, with a scar running down the left side of his face, a souvenir from a knife fight in his younger days. He was loyal to Henry McCord, the way a dog is loyal to the man who feeds it, and about twice as mean. "Riding fence line," Elias said evenly. "Like I said I would this morning." "Long time to ride fence." Wade's eyes were flat and cold. "Unless you found something interesting along the way." "Found the fence needs mending in 3 places. I'll get to it this week." "That all you found?" Wade pushed off from the doorframe, moving closer. "Nothing else worth mentioning." So his father already knew. Of course he did. "If you've got something to say, Wade, just say it. Your daddy wants to see you in his study, now." Wade smiled, showing yellow teeth. "And if I was you, boy, I'd have my story straight before I walked in there." Elias brushed past him without responding, his jaw tight. The walk from the barn to the house felt longer than usual, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Through the windows, he could see his mother moving in the kitchen, probably overseeing dinner preparations. She glanced up as he passed, and something in her expression told him she already knew what was coming, too. The door to his father's study was open, which somehow made it worse. An invitation to walk straight into the storm. "Come in, Elias. Close the door." Judge Henry McCord sat behind his massive desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, a stack of papers spread before him. He was 53 years old, iron-haired and iron-willed, a man who'd built an empire through a combination of shrewd business sense and an absolute unwillingness to lose. He'd been a territorial judge for 15 years, hence the title everyone used, and he knew how to wield both law and intimidation like weapons. Elias closed the door and stood before the desk, refusing to fidget like a schoolboy called to account. "I understand you met our new neighbors today," Henry said without preamble. "The squatters on the Fitzgerald land." "They're not squatters. They have a legal deed. They have a piece of paper." Henry's voice was mild, which was always more dangerous than his anger. Gerald Fitzgerald had no right to promise that land to anyone. He had debts when he died, debts that should have transferred the property to his creditors, to us specifically. "Did you hold the note on his debts?" "Some of them, enough to matter. But not all of them, and not enough to override a blood claim." Elias kept his voice level. "Those children are his niece and nephews, legal heirs. You know as well as I do that their claim is solid." Henry took a sip of his whiskey, studying his son over the rim of the glass. "I've spent 30 years building this ranch into something that matters, Elias. Something that will last. Your grandfather bled into this ground, your uncles died defending it from rustlers and raiders. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let some sob story from Ohio take what's ours. It's not ours, Father. It never was. Everything in this valley is ours." Henry's fist came down on the desk, making the whiskey glass jump. "Every acre, every creek, every blade of grass. We made this land worth something. We fought for it. We died for it. Those people showed up with nothing and expect to just take what we've earned. They showed up with a legal claim and 3 orphaned children. There's a difference. Is there?" Henry stood, moving around the desk to face his son directly. They were the same height, had the same broad shoulders, the same strong jaw. Looking at Henry McCord was like looking at what Elias would become in 25 years if he made all the same choices. "Let me explain something to you, son. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. You feel sorry for that girl and her brothers? Fine. Give them some supplies, some money, help them find a place in town. But they cannot stay on that land. Why? Because you want the water rights. Because we need the water rights." Henry's voice softened slightly, taking on the reasonable tone that had convinced countless juries. It's not about greed, Elias. It's about survival. We expand or we die. Other ranchers are already moving in staking claims, cutting off access. That creek connects our grazing land to the territorial road. Without it, we're landlocked. We lose value. We lose opportunity. Eventually, we lose everything. So 4 people need to lose their homes so we can add another line to the ledger. 4 people need to learn that this isn't Ohio. This is Montana territory, where the strong survive and the weak get swept away. I'm sorry their parents died. I'm sorry they came all this way for nothing, but that's life. Life is hard, and I won't apologize for doing what's necessary to protect our family. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. And if I don't agree, if I think there's another way, Henry's expression hardened. Then you'd better figure out where your loyalties lie, boy. Because this family, this ranch needs you to be strong, needs you to make hard choices. If you can't do that, he let the sentence hang, the threat implicit. If I can't, then what? You'll cut me off, disinherit me. I'll do what I have to do to protect what we've built. Henry moved back to his desk, the conversation clearly over in his mind. Wade rides out to the Fitzgerald place tomorrow. He's going to make it clear that those squatters need to move on. I expect you to stay here and stay out of it. Are we understood? Elias stood very still, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. This was it. The choosing time Clara had asked about. The moment when he had to decide who he was going to be. No, he said quietly. We're not understood. Because I'm riding back out there tomorrow and I'm going to help Clara Donovan make that cabin weatherproof for winter. And if Wade Garrett shows up making threats, he'll have to go through me first. The silence that followed was absolute. Henry McCord stared at his son like he was seeing a stranger. You would defy me over this, over what's right, yes. What's right, Henry repeated slowly, is taking care of your family, your real family, not some girl you just met. She's my neighbor. That makes her my responsibility too. She's nothing. Henry's voice cracked like a whip. She's a fool who's going to freeze or starve or give up, and when she does, that land will come to us anyway. Don't throw away your future for someone who won't even be here come spring. Maybe she will be, if someone helps her. And you've decided to be that someone. You've decided to choose some stranger over your own father. Elias met his father's eyes steadily. I've decided to be the kind of man who helps instead of taking. The kind of man who stands up for what's right even when it's hard. The kind of man, he paused, the words painful but necessary. The kind of man I wish you still were. For a moment, something flickered across Henry's face, hurt maybe, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold fury. Get out of my sight, Henry said quietly. And when this blows up in your face, when that girl loses everything anyway, and you've destroyed your relationship with your family for nothing, don't come crying to me about it. Elias turned and left without another word. In the hallway, he found his mother waiting, her face drawn with worry. I heard, Margaret McCord said softly. She was a small woman, delicate-featured, but there was steel in her spine. She'd had to have steel to survive 30 years married to Henry McCord. Elias, are you sure about this? No, he admitted, but I'm sure I can't stand by and do nothing. His mother reached up and cupped his face with both hands the way she used to when he was a boy. Your grandfather would have been proud of you. He always said a man's character is measured by what he does when no one's watching, when there's no profit in doing right. Father sees it different. Your father sees a lot of things different than he used to. There was sadness in her voice. He wasn't always this way, you know. When we were young, he believed in fairness and building something good, rather than just something big. But years of fighting, of losing people, of watching others try to take what was ours, it changed him, made him hard. I don't want to become that. Then don't. Margaret kissed his forehead gently. But be careful, son. Your father doesn't make idle threats, and Wade Garrett is a dangerous man. I know. Do you... Her eyes searched his. Do you really understand what you're risking? Not just your inheritance, but maybe your life. Men have died over land disputes out here. Good men. Elias thought about Clara standing in front of that cabin with a rifle, about Thomas trying to protect his little sisters, about the hollow hunger in those children's eyes. "Some things are worth the risk," he said. That night, Elias lay in his bed listening to the house settle around him, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about the choice he'd made and the consequences that would follow. Through the walls, he could hear his parents' voices, his father's low and angry, his mother's soft and pleading. They were arguing about him, he knew, about what he'd done and what would happen next. Sleep came late and restless, full of dreams, where he rode toward a burning cabin, where he arrived too late, where Clara's fierce eyes accused him of promises he couldn't keep. He woke before dawn, dressed quietly, and loaded a pack horse with supplies from the barn, tar paper nails, tools, some salted meat and dried beans from the stores. Not enough to be called charity, but enough to make a difference. Wade Garrett was waiting by the barn, arms crossed, that mean smile playing at his lips. "Boss said you might try something stupid," Wade drawled. "Said to remind you that accidents happen, even to pretty girls and their little brothers and sisters." Something cold and deadly settled in Elias's chest. "You threatening children now, Wade." "Not threatening, just observing facts. Montana's dangerous for folks who don't belong here. Bears, wolves, winter storms, all kinds of ways people get hurt." Elias stepped close enough to see the surprise flicker in Wade's eyes. "You listen to me, and you listen good. You or any of Father's men go near that family, you'll answer to me. Not in court, not in front of witnesses. Just you and me, and I promise you won't like how it ends." Big talk for a boy who's never... Elias's fist caught Wade square in the jaw, dropping him like a stone. The foreman scrambled back, blood trickling from his split lip, genuine shock on his scarred face. "I'm not a boy anymore," Elias said quietly, "and I'm not bluffing. Stay away from the Donovans. Tell Father I said so." He mounted Dusty and led the pack horse out of the yard, leaving Wade sitting in the dirt. His knuckles throbbed, and he knew he'd probably just made everything worse. But God help him, it had felt good. The sun was just clearing the mountains when he rode up to the Fitzgerald place. Clara was already awake, smoke rising from the chimney, the children's voices carrying through the thin cabin walls. She stepped outside when she heard his approach, still in her nightgown, with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her dark hair loose around her face. She looked young, like this, vulnerable. But when she saw the supplies he'd brought, when she saw the bruises already forming on his knuckles, her expression sharpened. "What happened?" "Just a disagreement with my father's foreman." Elias dismounted, began unloading the pack horse. "Nothing to worry about." "Elias?" She said his name like a reprimand, like she already knew him well enough to know when he was downplaying things. "What did you do?" He met her eyes, this fierce young woman who'd traveled 2,000 miles on nothing but courage and determination, who stood guard over 3 children with nothing but a rifle and will. "I chose a side," he said simply. "Now, let's fix your roof before the snow comes." And as the sun rose over the Montana territory. As Clara smiled, really smiled for the first time since he'd met her, Elias knew he'd made the right choice, no matter what it cost him. The war with his father had just begun. But standing here in the morning light with Clara Donovan and her family, Elias McCord felt more certain of himself than he had in years. Some things were worth fighting for. And he was just beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, this was one of them. The work on the roof took 3 full days, and by the end of it, Elias's hands were raw with blisters, and his shoulders ached in ways he hadn't felt since he was a green ranch hand learning the trade. But the cabin was sound now, the tar paper stretched tight across the worn shingles, the gaps sealed against the wind that would soon carry snow instead of just the promise of it. Clara worked beside him every step of the way, her movements sure despite her inexperience. She learned fast, asking questions only when necessary, her pride demanding she pull her own weight. Thomas proved himself handy with a hammer, and even young Mary helped by organizing nails and passing up tools. Little James mostly sat on a stump watching, still clutching that worn wooden horse, but on the second day he smiled at Elias, and that felt like a victory worth more than all the work combined. "You're good at this," Clara said on the 3rd afternoon as they sat on the porch steps sharing water from a tin cup. The children were inside preparing what would pass for supper, beans and a bit of the salted pork Elias had brought. "Building things, I mean." fixing them. My grandfather believed in knowing every part of the ranch, said a man who couldn't do the work himself had no business asking others to do it. Elias flexed his sore fingers. Spent my summers learning carpentry, blacksmithing, fence work. Drove my father crazy. He thought I should be in town learning law and business instead. Why didn't you? Because I liked the work. Liked making things solid, making them last. He glanced at her. What about you? You learn fast. That's not something you pick up from running a mercantile in Ohio. Clara's expression clouded. My father believed girls should be practical. He taught me bookkeeping and figures, but also how to mend and build and make do. Said a woman needed to be able to stand on her own feet, not just wait for some man to take care of her. Her voice softened. I didn't understand why he pushed so hard until after he was gone. Then I realized he'd been preparing me, like he knew. That I'd end up alone, responsible. She stared out at the land that was now hers, the creek winding through dry grass, the mountains rising in the distance, the sky so big it seemed to swallow everything beneath it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by them, the children, if dragging them out here was selfish. You gave them a chance. That's more than they had back in Ohio. A chance at what? Starving, slow, or freezing in a better climate. The bitterness in her voice cut deep. I keep telling myself it'll get easier, that we'll figure it out. But every day I wake up scared, Elias. Scared I'm not enough. Scared I'll fail them. Elias set down the water cup and turned to face her fully. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who traveled 2,000 miles with 3 children and barely any money. Someone who showed up to an empty cabin and didn't turn around. Someone who faced down a stranger with a rifle because she was willing to fight for what was hers. He paused, making sure she was listening. That's not someone who's going to fail. That's someone who's already won just by refusing to quit. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears she wouldn't let fall. You don't know that. You don't know what's coming. No, but I know you'll face it, and I know you won't be alone because I'm not going anywhere. Elias, you can't promise that. My father doesn't control my choices. Not anymore. He reached out and took her hand, calloused palm against calloused palm. I meant what I said. I'm in this now. Whatever comes. Before Clara could respond, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. 3 riders crested the ridge, moving at a purposeful trot, and Elias's jaw tightened as he recognized the lead horse. Wade Garrett had brought company. Get inside, Elias said quietly, standing. Get the children away from the windows. I'm not hiding in my own home. Clara, please, these men aren't here for conversation. But Clara was already on her feet, already moving toward the cabin door where her rifle leaned. Then we'll talk to them together. This is my land, and I'll face whoever comes onto it. The 3 riders pulled up 20 yards from the cabin, their horses snorting and stamping. Wade sat in the middle, his jaw still showing the bruise from Elias's fist. To his left was a lean, hard-faced man named Collins, who worked security for the McCord Ranch. To his right sat someone Elias didn't recognize, a stranger with cold eyes and a gun belt worn low and professional. Well, sir, Wade said, his voice thick with mockery. Look at this. The boss's boy playing house with the squatters. Careful how you talk, Wade, Elias warned. You're on private property, the Donovans' property. That's a matter of opinion. Wade spat tobacco juice into the dirt. My boss has a different view on who owns what around here. Your boss can take his view to the Territorial Land Office and file a proper challenge. Until then, these people have legal claim, and you need to ride on out. Collins leaned forward in his saddle, his hand resting casual on his holstered pistol. Mr. McCord sent us with a message for the lady. Seems only polite we deliver it. Then deliver it and go, Clara said, stepping up beside Elias. The rifle wasn't pointed at anyone, but it was there, held ready. I'm listening. Wade's smile was ugly. Judge McCord wants to make you an offer, Miss Donovan. $500 for your claim plus safe passage to wherever you want to go. That's generous considering the state of this place. The state of this place is none of your concern, and my answer is no. You might want to think on it a bit before you decide. The stranger spoke for the first time, his voice flat and emotionless. $500 is a lot of money for a woman alone with 3 young ones. Could set you up nice somewhere safer, somewhere more suitable. Who are you? Elias demanded. Name's Pike. I'm what you might call a consultant. I help people solve problems. Pike's eyes never left Clara. And you have a problem. Winter's coming, and this cabin won't hold against a real Montana blizzard. You got no supplies laid and no livestock worth mentioning, no way to sustain yourself. $500 could save your life. Or, Clara said coldly, I could stay on my own land and build my own life, without your money and without your threats. Now who said anything about threats? Wade grinned. Pike here is just being realistic. Bad things happen in winter. Roofs collapse under snow weight. Fires get out of control. People get lost in storms and freeze to death. Would be a shame if something happened to those pretty children of yours. Elias's hand moved to his gun, but Clara's voice stopped him. You listen to me, and you listen well, she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. I've buried my parents. I've traveled halfway across a continent with 3 children and nothing but hope. I faced down hunger, sickness, thieves, and men who thought being alone made me weak. She raised the rifle now, not quite pointing it, but close enough to make her meaning clear. I'm not afraid of winter. I'm not afraid of hard work. And I'm sure as hell not afraid of you. Pike's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, respect maybe, or calculation. Brave words. But bravery don't keep you warm when the temperature drops to 20 below. Bravery don't feed hungry children. Neither does running away. Clara's finger rested near the trigger, her stance steady. Now you've delivered your message and got your answer. Time for you to leave. One more thing, Wade said, turning his attention to Elias. Your father says if you insist on playing the fool, you can do it without McCord resources. That means no more supplies, no more tools, nothing from the ranch. You're cut off, boy. Hope your new friends are worth starving for. The words hit like a physical blow, but Elias kept his expression neutral. Tell my father I understand, and tell him I don't regret my choice. You will, Colin said quietly. When the snow's hip deep and you're trying to figure out how to feed 4 extra mouths on nothing but pride, you'll regret it then. The 3 riders turned and started back the way they'd come, but Pike looked back once, his gaze lingering on Clara with an intensity that made Elias's skin crawl. That one, Clara said quietly, watching them disappear over the ridge. Pike. He's different from the others. Hired gun, probably. My father must be serious if he's bringing in outside help. Elias felt the weight of what had just happened settle over him. Cut off from the ranch meant more than just losing supplies. It meant losing his position, his future, everything he'd spent his life building toward. It meant choosing Clara and her family over everything else. You should go back, Clara said, reading his thoughts. Before this goes too far, tell your father you were just being neighborly, that you're done now. He'll take you back. You know he will. Is that what you want? For me to leave? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is you're throwing away your life for people you barely know. That's not fair to you. Fairness, Elias said, is a luxury we can't afford. Remember, I believe those were your words. He turned to face her. This woman who'd stood up to 3 armed men without flinching, who carried the weight of 3 children's lives on her shoulders and refused to buckle. I told you I wasn't going anywhere. That hasn't changed just because things got harder. It's going to get worse, you know that. I know, but I also know I can't live with myself if I walk away now. He managed a small smile. Besides, someone's got to teach Thomas how to properly split firewood before winter. Have you seen the way he swings that axe? It's painful to watch. Clara's laugh was startled out of her genuine and surprised. You're insane. Probably, but so are you, or you wouldn't be here either. He touched her shoulder briefly, carefully. We'll figure it out, Clara, together. Inside the cabin, the children had been watching through the gaps in the walls. When Elias and Clara entered, Mary immediately launched herself at Elias, wrapping thin arms around his waist. I was scared, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. I thought they were going to hurt you. Hey now. Elias knelt down to her level. I'm fine. See? Not a scratch on me. But they were mean. They said bad things. Some people are mean. That doesn't mean they get to win. He smoothed her tangled hair back from her forehead. You know what the best way to beat mean people is? by being brave and kind and refusing to let them make you afraid. Can you do that?" Mary nodded solemnly, her freckled face serious. "I can try. That's all anyone can do, try their best and help each other." He stood, found Thomas watching him with old eyes and a young face. "You did good today, Thomas. Staying calm, keeping your sisters safe. That's what matters." "Are they going to come back?" Thomas asked bluntly. "Probably. Then we should be ready." The boy moved to a corner of the cabin where he'd been keeping the axe. "I've been practicing like you showed me. I'm getting better." "Good. But Thomas, listen to me. If they come back and things get dangerous, your job isn't to fight. It's to get your sisters and run. You understand there's a cave about half a mile north hidden in the rocks. You take Mary and James there and you hide until it's safe." "What about Clara?" "I'll look after Clara. You focus on the little ones." Thomas's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm 12. I'm not a child anymore. I can help. The best help you can give is making sure your family stays safe. That takes more courage than fighting." Elias gripped the boy's shoulder. "Can I count on you?" After a long moment, Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, after a meager supper of beans and cornbread after the children had settled into their blankets in the loft, Clara and Elias sat by the dying fire. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we prepare. We need to lay in supplies for winter food, firewood, whatever we can manage. We need to strengthen this cabin, make it as secure as possible, and we need to be ready for whatever my father tries next." "With what money? What resources?" Clara's voice was tired. "You heard Wade. You're cut off, and I have maybe $20 left to my name. Then we get creative. I can hunt, bring in meat. There's fish in the creek at least until it freezes. Thomas and I can cut enough firewood to see us through. It won't be comfortable, but we'll survive." "You keep saying we. But Elias, you have a home, a family, a whole life waiting for you if you just apologize to your father." "Had a home," he corrected. "Had a family that cared more about land than about doing right. As for my life..." He stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and shift. "I've spent 26 years living the life my father planned for me. Maybe it's time I figure out what life I want for myself." "And you think that life is here in a broken cabin with 4 strangers?" "I think that life is wherever I'm needed, wherever I can make a difference." He looked at her, this fierce, frightened, determined woman. "And right now that's here." Clara was quiet for so long that Elias thought she might not respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost too soft to hear. "I'm scared of needing you, of letting the children need you, because what happens when you change your mind, when this gets too hard and you realize we're not worth it? That's not going to happen. You don't know that. You can't promise that." "Clara." He waited until she looked at him. "I've made maybe 3 important decisions in my whole life. Staying with the ranch instead of going east for school. Standing up to my father about how he treats the hands, and choosing to help you. Of those 3, this is the only one I've never questioned, not for a second." "Why us? Why me?" It was a question Elias had been asking himself for days now, and he still wasn't sure he had the full answer. But sitting here in the firelight, watching the shadows play across Clara's face, seeing the weight she carried, and the strength it took to keep standing, he knew at least part of the truth. "Because the first time I saw you, you were hanging laundry with a rifle in reach and 3 kids depending on you, and you weren't beaten. You were bruised, you were exhausted, you were terrified, but you weren't beaten. And I thought if someone that strong is still fighting, the least I can do is fight with them." Clara's eyes shimmered. "That's the most foolish thing I've ever heard." "Probably. And the kindest." "Maybe." He stood, banked the fire for the night. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we start preparing in earnest. It's going to be a long few weeks." But sleep didn't come easy that night for either of them. Elias lay in his bedroll near the fire, listening to the wind pick up outside, thinking about Pike's cold eyes, and his father's ultimatum, and the 100 ways this could all go wrong. And in the loft above, Clara lay awake beside her sleeping siblings, wondering how she'd gotten here, wondering if trusting Elias McCord was the bravest thing she'd ever done, or the biggest mistake. The days that followed fell into a rhythm hard and relentless, but somehow sustainable. Elias and Thomas spent their mornings cutting firewood, their afternoons hunting or fishing, their evenings reinforcing the cabin's weak points. Clara and Mary preserved what food they could, rationing carefully, making every scrap count. Even little James helped gathering kindling and keeping the water buckets filled. They worked from dawn until dark, too busy and too tired for much conversation. But in the quiet moments, sharing a meal, resting between tasks, sitting by the fire, after the children slept, something was growing between Elias and Clara. Something that went beyond gratitude or duty or simple companionship. Trust, maybe. Or the beginnings of something deeper. On the 8th day, Elias rode into town, the small settlement called Bridger's Crossing, about 15 miles south. He needed to buy ammunition, salt, and a few other supplies they couldn't make or find themselves. He knew it was a risk. His father had influence in town and word would get back. But they needed what they needed, and pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. The general store was run by a man named Hoskins, a graying widower who'd been selling supplies to ranchers and homesteaders for 30 years. He took one look at Elias and shook his head. "Your daddy ain't gonna like you being here." "My daddy doesn't like a lot of things I do these days." Elias set his short list on the counter. "Can you help me or not?" Hoskins read the list, then looked up with shrewd eyes. "This is for those folks out at the old Fitzgerald place, the girl and her brothers." "It is. Heard you've been helping them. Heard your daddy ain't pleased about it." "Word travels fast." "Always does." Hoskins started gathering items from the shelves behind him. "Also heard Judge McCord's been making noise about taking that land, saying the claim ain't valid, that the girl's got no right to it." Elias's jaw tightened. "The claim is legal and properly filed. I've seen the deed myself." "Oh, I don't doubt it, but you know how these things go. Law's one thing, what actually happens is another." Hoskins set ammunition and salt on the counter. "Your daddy's got friends in the land office, got friends everywhere that matters. If he wants that property bad enough, he'll find a way to take it." "Not if I have anything to say about it." "That's what I figured you'd say." The older man studied Elias for a long moment. "You're throwing away a hell of a lot for people you barely know, son. You sure about this?" "No," Elias admitted. "But I'm sure I can't live with myself if I don't try." Hoskins nodded slowly, something like approval in his expression. "Your grandfather would have liked you standing up like this. He always said Henry needed someone to remind him what matters." He wrapped the supplies in brown paper, tied them with string. "This comes to $8, but I'm going to mark it as 6 in the books. Figure you can use the break." "Mr. Hoskins, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. I'm offering, and if you're fool enough to turn down help when it's given, you're dumber than you look." The old man's eyes twinkled. "Besides, I like that Donovan girl. She came through here 6 weeks back, her and those kids looking half-starved and completely lost. I gave her directions to the Fitzgerald place, sold her some basic supplies on credit she didn't ask for. She paid me back in full last week, every penny. Woman like that deserves a chance." Elias felt something warm spread through his chest. "She paid you back when..." "Walked 15 miles into town and 15 miles back. Brought me $4 in coins and a note thanking me for the kindness. Then she turned around and walked home again." Hoskins shook his head in wonder. "Pride like that is rare. Stubbornness like that is rarer. You hold on to people like that when you find them." "I intend to." "Good." Hoskins handed over the wrapped supplies. "And Elias, you watch your back. I've seen Pike around town asking questions about the Fitzgerald property, about who comes and goes. Man like that don't ask questions for fun." "I know. Thanks for the warning." As Elias loaded the supplies onto his horse, he became aware of eyes watching him from various doorways and windows along the main street. By nightfall, his father would know he'd been here, would know he'd bought supplies for Clara, would know he was still defying him. Let him know. The ride back to the cabin took 3 hours, and the sun was setting by the time Elias crested the ridge overlooking the property. What he saw made his blood run cold. Smoke rose from the cabin, too much smoke, the wrong color smoke. He spurred Dusty into a gallop, his heart hammering against his ribs. As he got closer, he could see Clara and the children outside Thomas frantically hauling water from the creek, while Clara beat at flames with a wet blanket. Fire licked at the cabin's north wall, eating through the old wood with terrifying speed. Elias hit the ground running, grabbed the other bucket, and ran for the creek. Together, he and Thomas formed a desperate chain, hauling water, throwing it on the flames, running back for more. Clara kept beating at the fire with the blanket. Her face soot-streaked, her hands raw. It took 20 minutes that felt like hours. But finally, blessedly, the flames died. The north wall was charred black, partially collapsed, but the rest of the cabin stood. Barely. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, the ruined blanket falling from her hands. Mary and James ran to her crying, and she gathered them close with trembling arms. Thomas stood apart, his young face frozen in shock, staring at the damage. "What happened?" Elias demanded, checking each of them for injuries. "Is anyone hurt?" "We're fine. We're all fine." Clara's voice shook. "I was making supper, stepped outside to get more firewood. When I came back, the wall was on fire. It spread so fast, Elias. 1 minute nothing, the next minute everything was burning. The stovepipe. I checked it this morning. It was fine. There was no reason." She stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Someone did this. Someone set this fire." "You don't know that." "Don't I?" Clara's voice went hard. "We've been here 6 weeks. We've cooked every day. The stove's been fine. And now right after your father's men come by making threats, it suddenly catches fire." Elias couldn't argue with her logic much as he wanted to. He moved to the damaged wall, examining it closely in the fading light. There caught on a nail a small scrap of cloth that didn't match anything they owned, and on the ground barely visible in the dirt boot prints. Large boot prints leading away from the cabin and disappearing into the brush. Someone had been here. Someone had set this fire while Clara was distracted, then vanished before they could be seen. "We can't stay here tonight," Elias said quietly. "The wall's not safe. If it collapses, it could bring the whole structure down." "Where else can we go?" Clara asked helplessly. "This is all we have." Elias looked at the 4 of them, exhausted, frightened, covered in soot and ash, still clinging to each other for comfort. He thought about the ranch house just a few miles west, about his own room sitting empty, about the fact that his mother would help them if she could. But his father controlled that house, and bringing Clara there would be like walking into the lion's den. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles north," he said finally. "It's rough, but it's shelter. We'll take the kids there tonight, come back at first light to assess the damage, and make repairs." Clara nodded numbly. They gathered what they could carry, blankets, food, the rifle, and started walking through the gathering dark. Elias led them with sure steps, carrying James on his shoulders when the boy's legs gave out. Thomas walked close to his sisters, his hand resting on the knife at his belt, the one Elias had given him for cutting kindling. The line shack was exactly as Elias remembered it. 1 room, dirt floor, a stone hearth that probably hadn't been used in years. But it had walls and a roof, and right now that was enough. He got a fire going while Clara spread blankets on the ground. The children huddled close to the flames, still shaking from fear and cold. Mary cried quietly, and little James had gone almost catatonic, staring at nothing. "They wanted to kill us," Thomas said suddenly, his voice flat. "That fire, if Clara hadn't gone outside when she did, if we'd all been sleeping." "But you weren't," Elias interrupted gently. "You were awake, you were smart, and you survived. That's what matters. Until next time." The boy's eyes were too old, too knowing. "They'll try again, won't they? They'll keep trying until we leave or until we're dead." Elias wanted to lie to offer false comfort, but Thomas deserved the truth. "Yes," he said quietly. "They probably will. But that means we have to be smarter, more careful. We have to watch out for each other and not give them any opportunities. Or we could just leave." Claire's voice was hollow. "Take your father's money and go somewhere safe, somewhere they can't reach us. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for the children to be safe. What I want is to not live in fear every single day. What I want—" Her voice broke. "I don't know anymore, Elias. I don't know what the right choice is." He moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The right choice is the one you can live with. If that means leaving, then we'll figure out where to go and how to get you there. I won't think less of you for it. Won't you?" Clara turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "All this time you've been telling me to stand my ground to fight for what's mine. And now the first time things get really hard, I'm ready to run. That must disappoint you. Clara, you've been fighting since before I met you. You fought harder than anyone should have to. If you need to stop fighting, if you need to choose survival over pride, there's no shame in that. There's only courage in knowing when you've done all you can. She leaned against him then, just slightly letting her head rest against his shoulder. It was the first time she'd allowed such contact, and Elias held very still, afraid to break the moment. I wanted to make them proud, she whispered. My parents. They worked so hard, sacrificed so much. I wanted to take this land they'd secured for us and turn it into something, prove that their lives meant something. They'd be proud of you regardless. You kept the family together. You brought them to safety. That's more than most people could have done.
But not enough, is it? It's never enough. From across the fire, Mary's small voice interrupted. Clara, I'm scared. Clara immediately pulled away from Elias, went to her sister, gathered all three children close. I know, sweetheart, I'm scared too. Are the bad men going to hurt us? Not if I can help it, not ever. But they burned our house. Then we'll fix it. We'll make it stronger than before. Clara smoothed Mary's hair back, kissed her forehead. We're Donovans. We don't quit, remember, no matter how hard things get. Even when we're scared. Especially when we're scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Thomas spoke up, his voice stronger now, like coming to Montana even though it was dangerous. Exactly like that. And staying even though people want us to leave. Clara hesitated, her eyes finding Elias's across the fire. He gave her the smallest nod, leaving the choice to her. Yes, Clara said finally, her voice growing firm. And staying, because this is our land, our home, and nobody has the right to take it from us. Even if they try to burn us out, Thomas pressed. Even then. Clara's jaw set with determination that Elias recognized, the same determination that had made her face down three armed men without flinching. We'll be more careful, we'll be smarter, but we won't be chased off. Do you understand? All of you? Mary nodded, followed by James and finally Thomas. And in that moment, watching Clara rally her siblings despite her own fear, Elias felt something shift in his chest, something profound and terrifying and absolutely right. He was in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Somewhere between that first day at the fence line and this moment in a forgotten line shack, he'd fallen completely in love with Clara Donovan, with her strength and her pride and her fierce determination to protect what was hers. With the way she faced down threats without backing up, the way she put her siblings before everything, the way she'd rather fight than run, even when running was the smarter choice. She was impossible and stubborn and more courageous than anyone he'd ever known. And he was absolutely, irrevocably in love with her. The knowledge settled over him with a strange calm. He didn't question it, didn't second-guess it. He simply knew it the way he knew his own name, the way he knew the Montana sky would be clear and endless come morning. The question was what to do about it. They spent that night in the line shack, taking turns keeping watch, though no one really slept. At first light, they walked back to the cabin to survey the damage. In the cold morning air, it looked worse than Elias had hoped, but better than he'd feared. The north wall would need to be completely rebuilt, but the structure was salvageable. 2 weeks, he estimated, running his hands over the charred wood. Maybe 3 if we run into problems. We can do this, Clara. We can fix it. With what money? What supplies? We'll figure it out. Maybe I can trade labor in town for materials. Maybe... Elias McCord. They both turned to find Elias's mother sitting in a small buggy, the reins held loosely in her hands. Margaret McCord looked older than Elias remembered, more tired, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Mother, what are you doing here? I heard about the fire. Half the county heard about the fire. Your father made sure of that. Margaret climbed down from the buggy with practiced ease. He's bragging about it, Elias, saying it's proof that some people don't belong in Montana, that the land itself is rejecting them. He set that fire, or had it set. I know. Margaret's voice was heavy with sorrow. I confronted him about it this morning. He didn't deny it, said it was a warning that the next one would be worse if they didn't take his offer and leave. Clara stepped forward, her spine straight despite exhaustion.
Mrs. McCord, I don't want trouble between you and your husband, but I need you to know we're not leaving. Not for threats, not for fire, not for anything. This land is ours and we're staying. Margaret studied Clara for a long moment, then smiled. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. She reached into the buggy and pulled out a heavy canvas sack. I brought supplies, lumber nails, tar paper enough to rebuild that wall properly. And food. Real food, not the scraps you've been making do with. Mrs. McCord, we can't accept, Clara started, but Margaret held up a hand. It's not charity. It's an investment. I'm investing in seeing my son happy for the first time in years. I'm investing in seeing someone stand up to my husband's bullying. And I'm investing in you, Miss Donovan, because anyone brave enough to face down Henry McCord deserves every bit of help they can get. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've survived the winter and my husband realizes he can't break you. Margaret turned to Elias. Your father knows I'm here. He knows what I brought you. We had quite the argument about it, actually. I told him if he was going to act like a tyrant, I was going to act like a rebel. I don't think he knew what to do with that. Mother, he could what, divorce me? After 30 years and all the secrets I know? Margaret's smile was sharp. Your father isn't a fool, Elias. He knows I'm the one thing keeping this valley from turning completely against him. He needs me, even if he hates admitting it. She reached out and cupped Elias's face with both hands, the same gesture she'd used when he was a child. I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the man you've become. Your grandfather would be too. Then she turned back to the buggy, pulled out one more item, a small wooden box. She handed it to Clara. This was my mother's. She gave it to me when I married Henry, said every woman needs something that's hers alone, something beautiful to remember that life isn't all struggle and hardship. Margaret opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small sapphire. I want you to have it, not as a bribe or a gift, but as a promise that you have at least one McCord on your side no matter what happens. Clara couldn't speak, could only stare at the ring with tears streaming down her face. Finally, she managed, I can't take this, it's too much. You can and you will, because I'm old and stubborn and I won't take no for an answer. Margaret closed Clara's fingers around the box. Now, let's rebuild this wall before any more snow comes. I might be 50 years old, but I still remember how to swing a hammer. And so they worked, the five of them, Elias, Clara, Thomas, Margaret, and even Mary helping where she could. They rebuilt the burned wall board by board, stronger than before, sealing every gap against the wind and weather. They worked through the day and into the evening, stopping only when darkness made it impossible to see. By the time Margaret left the cabin, was whole again, scarred, yes, marked by what had happened, but standing, defiant, just like the family inside it. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara showed Elias the ring by firelight. She gave me hope, Clara said quietly. When I thought I had none left, your mother gave me hope that maybe we can win this, that maybe not all McCords are enemies. Not all of us, Elias agreed. Some of us are something else entirely. Clara looked up at him, the ring cupped in her palm, questions in her eyes. What are we, Elias? What is this between us? I don't know. He lied because the truth was too big, too soon, too likely to frighten her away. But I know I want to find out, if you'll let me. Even though it's complicated, even though your father will never accept it. Especially because of those things. He reached out and closed his hand gently over hers, the ring pressed between their palms. Some things are worth fighting for, Clara. You taught me that. She smiled, then really smiled, and in the firelight she was so beautiful it hurt to look at her. Then I guess we keep fighting, she said. Together, Elias confirmed. And outside the Montana wind picked up, carrying the scent of winter on its breath, promising trials to come. But inside the rebuilt cabin, 5 people settled in for the night, warmer, safer, and more determined than ever. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun, but they would face it together. And that made all the difference. The first snow came 3 weeks later, soft and quiet, in the pre-dawn darkness. Elias woke to find the world transformed, everything covered in a blanket of white that made the landscape look clean and new, as if the struggles of the past months had been erased by winter's touch. But he knew better.
Snow didn't erase problems, it just made them harder to see coming. He'd been sleeping in the barn he and Thomas had constructed from salvaged wood and determination, a rough structure barely big enough for Dusty and the 3 chickens they'd managed to acquire through trade. It wasn't much, but it kept the animals sheltered, and it gave Elias a place to sleep that preserved Clara's propriety. The valley might be isolated, but gossip traveled faster than wildfire, and the last thing Clara needed was rumors about improper arrangements added to all her other troubles. Through the barn's gaps, he could see smoke already rising from the cabin's chimney. Clara would be up starting the fire, preparing what passed for breakfast. The woman never seemed to sleep, never seemed to rest. She moved through each day with relentless purpose, as if stopping even for a moment might let all the fear and exhaustion catch up with her. Elias pulled on his boots and coat, stepped out into the snow. It came up past his ankles, which meant they'd gotten maybe 4 inches overnight. Not a blizzard, but a reminder that worse was coming, much worse. The cabin door opened before he reached it, and Clara stood silhouetted against the warm light inside a shawl wrapped around her shoulders over her faded nightgown. "You're up early," she said softly, careful not to wake the children still sleeping in the loft. "So are you." "I heard the wind change, knew it was snowing." She stepped back to let him inside where the fire crackled and coffee, real coffee, thanks to Margaret's supplies, filled the small space with its rich scent. "First snow of the season. My father used to say the first snow tells you what kind of winter to expect. What's this one telling you?" Clara moved to the window, looked out at the white world. "That we need to be ready for anything." Elias poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, savoring the warmth that seeped into his cold hands. Over the past weeks, this had become their ritual, these quiet morning moments before the children woke, before the day's work began, when they could just be 2 people sharing coffee and conversation in the gray light of dawn. "Thomas is getting good with the axe," Elias said. "Yesterday, he split more wood than I did." "He's growing up too fast." There was sadness in Clara's voice. "Sometimes I look at him, and I don't see my little brother anymore. I see a young man carrying weight no 12-year-old should have to carry. He's strong, they all are. They get that from you. Or maybe they're just good at pretending, like I am." Clara turned from the window, and in the firelight, Elias could see the exhaustion carved into her features. "Some nights I lie awake wondering how long I can keep this up. Keep pretending I know what I'm doing, that I have a plan, that everything's going to be fine. You don't have to pretend with me, don't I? You gave up everything to help us, Elias. Your home, your father, your whole future. The least I can do is not fall apart in front of you." Elias set down his coffee cup and moved to where she stood. "Clara, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "I didn't give up everything. I traded one future for a different one. Maybe a better one. And you're not falling apart, you're holding together against impossible odds. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it feels an awful lot like we're just delaying the inevitable. Your father's going to win eventually. Men like him always do." "Not always. Not if we're smart and careful and refuse to quit." "You sound so certain." "I am certain. About this. About you." The words came out more intense than he'd intended, and Clara's eyes widened slightly. "I'm certain that you're the strongest person I've ever met. I'm certain that those children are lucky to have you. And I'm certain that whatever comes, we'll face it together." For a long moment, Clara just stared at him. Then so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Why? Why what? Why do you have so much faith in me? In us? You barely knew me when you made the choice to help. You didn't owe me anything, so why risk everything?" It was the question Elias had been avoiding, the truth he'd been holding close, because once he spoke it aloud, everything would change. But standing here in the firelight with snow falling outside and Clara's fierce, frightened, beautiful eyes searching his face, he couldn't hold it back anymore. "Because the first time I saw you, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like. And every day since then, I've watched you fight and struggle and refuse to break, and that something has gotten stronger until I can't ignore it anymore." He took a breath, steadied himself. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara. Maybe I've been falling since that first day, and I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably foolish, but it's the truth. That's why I'm here. That's why I'll keep being here."
The silence that followed felt eternal. Clara's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, fear, and something else, something that might have been hope. "Elias, she started, but whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the sound of horses outside. They both moved to the window instantly, Elias's hand going to the rifle hanging beside the door. Through the falling snow, he could make out 3 riders approaching slowly, deliberately. Not Wade Garrett this time. These were men he didn't recognize, hard-faced and armed, sitting their horses with the easy confidence of people used to violence. "Get the children up," Elias said quietly. "Get them dressed and ready to run if you need to. Remember that cave I showed Thomas?" "I remember." Clara's voice had gone flat emotionless, the tone she used when fear threatened to overwhelm her. "But Elias, if they're here to—" "Just get the children ready. I'll handle this." "You can't handle 3 armed men alone." "I'm not planning to fight them. I'm planning to talk to them. But if things go wrong, you need to be ready to get those kids out of here. Promise me." Clara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I promise." She disappeared up the ladder to the loft while Elias checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. He'd been expecting something like this ever since the fire. His father wasn't the type to give up after one failed attempt. The 3 riders stopped 30 yards from the cabin, making no move to dismount. They just sat there, patient and ominous in the falling snow. Finally, one of them, a lean man with a scarred face and cold eyes, called out, "Elias McCord, we need to talk." Elias stepped out onto the porch, the rifle held loose but ready. "So talk. You're on private property, so make it quick. Your father sent us with a message. He's tired of playing games. He's filing a formal challenge to the Donovan claim, and he's got 3 territorial commissioners ready to hear his case in Helena next month. He wants you to know that when he wins, and he will win, there won't be any second chances. The family leaves or they get removed, by force if necessary. The claim is legal. Any commissioner worth his salt will see that." The scarred man smiled. "Thing is, these particular commissioners owe your daddy favors. Big favors. The kind that get paid back no matter what the law says. So you can play at farming all you want. McCord, but come spring, this land belongs to your father. Only question is whether the girl and her brats leave peaceable or in pine boxes." Rage flooded through Elias, hot and dangerous. "You threatening children now, that what you men have sunk to—" "Not threatening, just laying out facts." The man's smile widened. "Your daddy also wanted me to tell you something personal. He says you've got one more chance to come home to stop this foolishness and remember where your loyalties lie. You do that, he'll let the girl keep enough money to start over somewhere far from here. You don't, well, he says blood should mean more than strangers, but if you're determined to choose wrong, you'll face the consequences same as them." "Tell my father," Elias started, but another voice cut him off. "Tell your father nothing because this conversation is over." Margaret McCord rode up from the south, sitting tall in her saddle despite the snow and cold. She was bundled in furs, but her expression was ice. "You men are trespassing on property claimed by the Donovans, and you've delivered your message. Time to leave." The scarred man's smile faded. "Mrs. McCord, didn't expect to see you out here." "I'm sure you didn't. I'm also sure my husband didn't authorize you to threaten children's lives. That particular piece of bravado was your own addition. Wasn't it, Mr. Drake?" Drake shifted uncomfortably. "We were just making sure the message was clear." "Oh, it's clear, crystal clear. You're bullies and cowards hiding behind my husband's name to make threats you'd never have the courage to carry out yourselves." Margaret's voice could have cut glass. "Now I'm going to give you 10 seconds to turn those horses around and ride out. If you're still here when I'm done counting, I'll make sure everyone in Bridger's Crossing knows exactly what kind of men my husband hired. The kind who threaten 6-year-old children. I wonder how that will affect his standing with the decent people in this valley." Drake's face darkened. "You'd go against your own husband. I'd go against anyone who threatens children. Now move. 1, 2, 3. The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Margaret McCord might be just one woman, but she had social power connections, a voice that carried weight in ways Henry's money and intimidation never could. Threatening her was very different from threatening Clara. 4, 5, 6. Come on, Drake muttered to his companions. This isn't worth it. They turned and rode off into the snow, disappearing back the way they'd come. Margaret waited until they were out of sight before dismounting, her movements stiff with cold and age. You shouldn't have come, Elias said, even as he moved to help her. Father will be furious. Your father is always furious these days. I've stopped letting it dictate my choices. She accepted his arm, let him guide her toward the cabin. I came to warn you. The legal challenge is real, Elias. Henry's been working on it for weeks, calling in favors, making deals. He's got 3 commissioners lined up who'll rule in his favor regardless of what the law says. Can he do that just by a ruling? He can if no one stops him. These are territorial commissioners, not federal judges. They have a lot of discretion, and they're all men who owe your father their positions. Margaret paused at the cabin door. But there might be a way around it. If Clara has someone to argue her case, someone with legal training, someone the commissioners have to take seriously, it becomes harder for them to just dismiss it out of hand. I don't have legal training. I never finished. I know, but I do. Or I did once upon a time. At Elias's shocked expression, Margaret smiled sadly. Did you think I always planned to be just a rancher's wife? I studied law back east before I met your father. Never got to practice. Women weren't allowed to argue cases back then, and barely more now. But I know the law, Elias, and I can help Clara prepare a defense that even crooked commissioners will have trouble ignoring. Clara appeared in the doorway, the children clustered behind her. Mrs. McCord, come in, please. You must be freezing. They gathered inside the small cabin, the children giving up their seats near the fire for Margaret, while Clara poured coffee with shaking hands. The fear was still there in her eyes, but also determination. Whatever else these past months had taught her, they'd taught her not to crumble under pressure. Tell me about your deed, Margaret said, warming her hands on the coffee cup. Everything about it. How you got it, where it's filed, what documentation you have. Clara retrieved the metal lockbox from its hiding place beneath the floorboards and spread its contents on the makeshift table. The deed worn, but official. Letters from her uncle to her father establishing the family connection. A copy of Gerald Fitzgerald's death certificate. The receipt from the Territorial Land Office showing the claim had been properly filed and fees paid. Margaret examined each document carefully, her expression growing more thoughtful with each page. This is good. Better than I expected. The chain of ownership is clear, the filing is proper, everything is in order. Then why can the commissioners rule against us? Clara asked. Because your father-in-law, Margaret caught herself. Because Henry will argue that Gerald Fitzgerald had outstanding debts at the time of his death, and that those debts supersede family inheritance. He'll claim he holds the note on those debts, and therefore has right of seizure. Does he hold the note? Probably. Or he's arranged to buy it from whoever does. Either way, it gives him a legal argument, even if it's a weak one. Margaret set down the papers. But here's the thing, debt claims have to be filed within a certain time frame. If Henry waited too long to make his claim, if he sat on it while you improved the property and established residence, he may have forfeited his right. How do we prove that? Elias asked. We establish exactly when Gerald died, when his debts became due, and when Henry first made his claim. If there's a significant gap, 6 months or more, we can argue he abandoned any right to collect through property seizure. Claire leaned forward, hope flickering in her eyes. And that would work. That would let us keep the land. It would give us an argument, a real one based on actual law rather than just hope and stubbornness. Margaret looked between Clara and Elias. But I need to be honest with you both. This is going to be a real fight. Henry has resources, connections, and he's willing to bend or break rules to get what he wants. Even with a solid legal defense, we might lose. And if we do lose, we'll be ruined, Clara finished quietly. Not just landless, but broke. The legal fees alone— I'll cover the legal fees, Margaret interrupted. And before you argue, understand that this isn't charity. This is me finally standing up to my husband's tyranny. This is me doing what I should have done years ago. Her voice hardened. Henry has gotten away with too much for too long because I stayed quiet, because I told myself I was keeping peace in the family. But there's a difference between keeping peace and enabling cruelty. I'm done being an enabler. Elias reached across the table and took his mother's hand. Thank you for everything.
Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we win.
Margaret squeezed his hand, then turned back to Clara. We need to leave for Helena in 2 weeks. That will give us time to prepare our case and get there before the hearing. Can you be ready? I can't leave the children alone here for that long. It's not safe. Then bring them. All of you come. We'll rent rooms in town, make a proper expedition of it. Margaret's eyes sparkled with something that might have been excitement. It's been years since I've argued a case. This will be interesting. Over the next 2 weeks, the cabin became a makeshift law office. Margaret wrote out every few days with books and papers teaching Clara the finer points of territorial land law, helping her prepare testimony, coaching her on how to present herself before commissioners who would already be biased against her. Clara absorbed everything with fierce concentration, staying up late by candlelight to study and memorize, determined to know the law as well as any man. Elias watched her transform before his eyes. The frightened young woman who'd held a rifle on him that first day was still there. But now there was something else too. Confidence, knowledge, the beginning of real power. She was learning that battles weren't just won with guns and determination. Sometimes they were won with words and laws and the willingness to stand up in a courtroom and demand justice. Thomas took over more of the daily work, proving himself capable beyond his years. He split firewood, hauled water, kept the chickens fed and the cabin warm. Mary helped Clara with the legal preparation, reading documents aloud so Clara could focus on memorizing. Even little James contributed, keeping quiet during study sessions and entertaining himself with the wooden horse and the few other toys Margaret brought. They were becoming a family, Elias realized. Not through blood, but through shared struggle and mutual dependence. Thomas looked to him for guidance. Mary sought his approval. James climbed into his lap in the evenings and fell asleep to the sound of his voice reading from the one book they owned, a collection of frontier stories Margaret had given them. And Clara had started looking at him differently. Ever since the morning he'd confessed his feelings, something had shifted between them. She didn't pull away when he stood close. She sought his opinion, valued his advice. Sometimes he'd catch her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something tender and frightened and full of possibility. The night before they were scheduled to leave for Helena after the children had gone to sleep, Elias and Clara sat together on the porch, despite the cold. The sky was clear for the first time in days, stars scattered across the darkness, like diamonds on black velvet. "Are you scared?" Elias asked quietly. Terrified. Clara pulled her coat tighter around herself. "What if I freeze up? What if I can't remember the arguments Margaret taught me? What if I look at those commissioners and see your father behind them and just break?" "You won't break. That's not who you are. You keep saying that. You keep having all this faith in me. But what if you're wrong? What if I'm not as strong as you think I am?" Elias turned to face her fully. "Then you're still stronger than anyone else I know. Clara, listen to me. 6 months ago, you were alone in a strange territory with 3 children and nothing but a broken cabin. Now you're preparing to argue land law before territorial commissioners. You've learned things in weeks that take most people years. You've stood up to threats and fire and everything my father could throw at you. Whatever happens in that hearing, you've already won by refusing to be beaten. But if we lose the hearing, we lose everything. Maybe. Or maybe we find another way. There's always another way if you're willing to keep looking." He reached out and took her hand. Cold fingers wrapping around colder fingers. "I meant what I said before, about falling in love with you. I know you haven't said it back, and I'm not asking you to. But I need you to know that whatever happens in Helena, whatever the commissioners decide, I'm not walking away. I'm not giving up on you or the children or this life we're building." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You should. You should give up on us. We're nothing but trouble, nothing but everything," Elias interrupted. "You're everything that matters. You and those kids in there. You're the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I finally understand what my grandfather meant when he said, 'A man's life should be about more than just accumulating land and wealth.' Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man. He was, and he'd like you, I think. He always respected people who fought for what was theirs." They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing you.
I know that's selfish. I know we're not even, you've never actually asked me to be anything more than friends, and I haven't. But I'm scared that if we lose this case, if your father wins, you'll realize you made a mistake choosing us. That you'll resent us for costing you your family. That will never happen. You can't know that. Yes, I can, because my family is right here. He gestured toward the cabin where the children slept. It's you and Thomas and Mary and James. It's my mother who's risking her marriage to help us. That's family. Not blood or name or legacy, but people who stand by each other when things get hard. Clara turned to look at him, and in the starlight, her face was beautiful beyond words. Elias McCord, you're either the best man I've ever met or the most foolish. I haven't decided which yet. Can I be both? She laughed, a sound he'd heard too rarely, and the sound of it warmed something deep in his chest. I suppose you can. God knows you'd have to be at least a little foolish to still be here. Then I'm proudly foolish. He raised her hand to his lips, kissed her cold knuckles gently. And I'll stay foolish as long as you'll let me. Clara didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder the way she had that night in the line shack after the fire. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I've never had time for courting or romance. I've spent my whole life just trying to survive, trying to keep the family together. I don't know how to be softer, gentler, the things men probably want in a woman. I don't want you softer or gentler. I want you exactly as you are. Stubborn and difficult and scared all the time. Fierce and brave and strong enough to hold up the sky if you had to. Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer against the cold. You don't have to change for me, Clara. You never did. What about after Helena, after the hearing, after we know whether we get to keep the land or not? What happens then? It was a question Elias had been asking himself, a future he'd been imagining in the quiet moments when he should have been sleeping. I don't know exactly, but I know what I hope happens. Tell me. I hope we win the hearing and keep the land. I hope we build this place into something real, not a broken cabin, but a home. I hope Thomas grows up strong, and Mary grows up happy, and James grows up knowing he's safe. He paused, his heart hammering. And I hope you let me be part of that, not just as a neighbor or a friend, but as more. Clara was quiet for so long that Elias thought he'd said too much, pushed too far. But then she whispered, I hope that too. God help me, I hope that too. They sat together under the stars until the cold drove them inside, until Clara reluctantly retreated to the loft and Elias returned to his bed in the barn. But something had shifted between them, something profound and precious. They hadn't made promises, hadn't spoken vows, but they'd acknowledged what was growing between them, had given it room to breathe and take shape. The next morning, they loaded into the wagon Elias had borrowed from a sympathetic neighbor, one of the few people in the valley who didn't fear Henry McCord's retribution. Margaret met them at the fork in the road, riding her own horse and leading a pack horse loaded with supplies for the journey. She'd told her husband she was visiting her sister in Helena. Whether he believed her or not, he hadn't stopped her, which Clara took as a good sign. The journey to Helena took 4 days of hard travel over snow-covered roads. They camped at night, the children huddled together for warmth, while the adults took turns keeping watch. Margaret proved herself as capable as any ranch hand setting up camp and breaking it down with practiced efficiency. She told stories of her youth back east of studying law in secret because women weren't supposed to have such ambitions of meeting Henry McCord and believing he was different from other men, more progressive, more enlightened. He was different once, Margaret said quietly one night after the children had fallen asleep. Or maybe I just wanted to believe he was. Either way, the man I married isn't the man he became. Power changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he'd always been underneath. Do you regret it? Claire asked. Marrying him? Margaret considered the question carefully. I regret what he became. I regret not standing up to him sooner, but I don't regret Elias. He's proof that good can come from even flawed beginnings. She smiled at her son across the fire. He's better than both of us. Takes the best parts of Henry's determination and my conscience, and none of the worst. I'm right here, Mother, Elias said dryly. No need to embarrass me. It's not embarrassment if it's true.
but Margaret's eyes were soft with affection.
You've made me proud, son. Whatever happens in Helena, remember that. Helena, when they finally reached it, was bigger than Clara had expected. A real city with brick buildings, paved streets, and more people than she'd seen in months. The territorial capital bustled with activity. Even in winter, politicians and merchants and fortune seekers all crowding together in pursuit of their various dreams. Margaret had arranged rooms at a respectable boarding house, 3 rooms in a row on the 2nd floor. It was more space than they'd had in months, and the children explored every corner with wide-eyed wonder.
For Mary and James especially, who'd spent their whole lives in small towns and rural areas, the city was overwhelming and magical in equal measure. Real beds, Mary breathed, running her hand over the quilted coverlet, with actual mattresses. And glass in all the windows, Thomas added, peering down at the street below. No rags or boards anywhere. Clara felt something tighten in her chest, seeing how amazed the children were by things that should have been ordinary. This was what she wanted for them, not wealth or luxury necessarily, but security, stability. The simple comfort of knowing they had a real home waiting. The hearing tomorrow would determine whether that dream stayed alive or died. That evening, Margaret reviewed Clara's testimony one final time, drilling her on the key points, making sure every date and detail was locked in her memory.
Elias watched Clara transform into someone he barely recognized. Shoulders back, chin up, voice clear and confident as she recited property law and inheritance rights like she'd been born to it. "You're ready," Margaret said finally, satisfaction in her voice. "More than ready. You know this case better than some lawyers I've met. But will it be enough?" Clara's carefully constructed confidence wavered. "Against your husband's influence, against commissioners who've already decided, it will have to be, because it's all we have." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. "But Clara, listen to me. Even if we lose tomorrow, even if everything goes wrong, you'll have proven something important. You'll have proven that you're not someone who can be easily dismissed or intimidated. You'll have stood up in a court of law and demanded justice. That matters regardless of the outcome." "Does it, if I lose everything?" "Yes,
because how we fight matters as much as whether we win. You'll teach your siblings that truth is worth standing up for even when the odds are against you. That's a lesson worth any cost." Late that night, unable to sleep, Clara stood at the window looking out over the unfamiliar city. Behind her, Mary and James slept soundly in the big bed, exhausted from the journey and the excitement of new surroundings. In the next room, she could hear Thomas's soft snoring through the thin wall. And beyond that, Elias in the 3rd room, probably awake too, worrying about tomorrow. A soft knock made her turn. Elias stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "Couldn't sleep either," he asked quietly. "Too much in my head. Too many ways tomorrow could go wrong." "Or right, it could go right," Clara smiled sadly. "You never stop hoping, do you? Even when hoping seems foolish. Especially then, that's when hope matters most." But he stepped into the room, careful to leave the door open. Propriety still mattered even here. "I wanted to tell you something before tomorrow, in case I don't get the chance after." That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know anymore. Elias ran a hand through his hair, looking unusually uncertain. "I've been thinking about what comes after. Win or lose tomorrow, what happens next? And I realized I need to say this now while I still have the courage." Claire's heart began to pound. "Say what? That I love you. Not falling anymore, I'm there. Completely. And I know the timing is terrible. I know we're in the middle of a crisis and tomorrow might change everything. But I needed you to know that whatever the commissioners decide, however this all turns out, my feelings won't change. I love you, Clara Donovan. I love your strength and your pride, and the way you'd fight the devil himself to protect your family. I love that you learned land law in 3 weeks just to have a fighting chance. I love..." Clara crossed the room and kissed him. It was brief chase nothing that would scandalize the sleeping children or violate the proprieties they'd worked so hard to maintain, but it was real sincere, full of all the words she didn't know how to say. When she pulled back, Elias stared at her in wonder. I don't know how to love softly, Clara whispered. I don't know how to be romantic or proper or any of the things women are supposed to be. But I know that when I think about the future, if we have a future, I can't imagine it without you in it. So if that's love, if that's enough, then yes, I love you too. Elias's smile could have lit the whole city. It's more than enough. It's everything. They stood together in the quiet room, hands clasped, foreheads, touching, drawing strength from each other for the battle to come. Outside, Helena slept. Tomorrow, the hearing would determine their fate. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. And sometimes that was all the hope anyone needed. Morning came too quickly and too slow, the sun rising over Helena to reveal a cold, clear day. Clara dressed in her best dress, which was still just the mended blue calico, but Margaret had pressed it carefully and added a borrowed shawl that made it look almost respectable. She braided her hair tight, pinned it up severely, trying to look older, more mature, more worthy of being taken seriously. You look like a woman who means business, Margaret said approvingly. That's exactly the impression we want. The territorial building where the hearing would be held was an imposing structure of gray stone built to last and to intimidate. As they climbed the steps, Clara's legs felt like water, her carefully rehearsed arguments suddenly fleeing her mind. But Elias's hand at her elbow steadied her, and Margaret's confident stride led the way. The hearing room was smaller than Clara had imagined, but no less intimidating. 3 commissioners sat behind a raised desk, stern-faced men in dark suits who looked at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. And at a table to the left sat Henry McCord, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive clothes looking supremely confident. This was the first time Clara had seen Elias's father up close, and the resemblance was startling. Henry had the same strong jaw, the same broad shoulders, the same piercing eyes. But where Elias's eyes held warmth and compassion, Henry's held only cold calculation. He looked at his son, at his wife, at Clara, and her siblings sitting in the back row, and his expression revealed nothing. The head commissioner, a silver-haired man named Bradshaw, called the hearing to order. We're here to consider a challenge to the land claim filed by Miss Clara Donovan regarding the property formerly owned by Gerald Fitzgerald. Mr. McCord, as the challenging party, you may present your case first. What followed was 2 hours of legal arguments that made Clara's head spin. Henry's lawyers presented their case. With polished precision, Gerald Fitzgerald had debts. Henry McCord held the notes on those debts. Therefore, the property should pass to him as payment. The family claim was invalid because a debt obligation supersedes inheritance rights. They made it sound so logical, so reasonable. Clara felt hope draining away with each carefully constructed argument. Then it was their turn. Margaret stood, and suddenly the room seemed to shift. She was just one woman, not even officially a lawyer, speaking on behalf of a girl barely out of her teens. But when she started talking, her voice rang with authority and conviction. She dissected Henry's case point by point, revealing the gaps in his timeline. The suspicious delay in filing his claim, the fact that he'd sat on the alleged debt for 2 full years while Gerald was alive, and had only suddenly remembered it when the property had new claimants. She cited case law territorial precedent, the legal doctrine of laches, the principle that delay in asserting a right may result in its forfeiture. The law exists to prevent exactly this kind of opportunistic claim, Margaret said, her voice ringing through the chamber. Mr. McCord had years to pursue his debt collection while Gerald Fitzgerald was alive. He didn't. He had months after Mr. Fitzgerald's death before my clients arrived. He didn't. Only when Miss Donovan and her siblings actually improved the property, invested their labor and resources, established residence, only then did Mr. McCord suddenly remember this convenient debt. The commissioners cannot reward such blatant manipulation of the system. She was magnificent. Even Henry's lawyers looked impressed, though they tried to hide it. Then Margaret called Clara to testify. Clara stood on shaking legs, moved to the witness chair, and faced the 3 commissioners who would decide her fate. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she felt Elias's eyes on her, saw his encouraging nod, and something steadied inside her. Miss Donovan, Margaret began gently, please tell the commissioners how you came to claim this property. And Clara told them everything. About her parents dying, about the letter her father had saved from Uncle Gerald, about the journey west with 3 frightened children and barely enough money to eat. About arriving to find the cabin falling down, about working every day from dawn to dusk to make it livable, about putting her siblings' safety above everything. She told them about Wade Garrett's threats, about the fire that had nearly killed them, about refusing to be driven off land that was legally and morally hers. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stated the facts in a clear, steady voice and let the truth speak for itself. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Henry McCord himself stood. "May I ask the witness a question?" His voice was cold, controlled. Commissioner Bradshaw nodded reluctantly. Henry turned to Clara, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "Miss Donovan, you claim this land is rightfully yours, but you're a single woman, barely more than a girl with 3 young children to care for. Even if we rule in your favor today, how long do you really think you'll last one winter?" 2. Montana is harsh, and it doesn't forgive weakness or ignorance. Wouldn't your family be better served by taking my offer, using that money to build a life somewhere safer? It was a test, Clara realized. A final attempt to make her back down, to prove she wasn't strong enough for this fight. She stood, met his eyes directly. "Mr. McCord, you're right about one thing. Montana is harsh, but so is losing your parents at 22 and having to raise your siblings alone. So is traveling 2,000 miles on hope and courage. So is standing up to men who think they can take whatever they want just because they have money and power." Her voice grew stronger. "I've learned something these past months. Strength isn't about never being afraid or never struggling. It's about refusing to quit even when quitting would be easier. My family belongs on that land. Not because we're strong enough to never fail, but because we're stubborn enough to keep getting back up every time we fall. And no amount of money you offer will change that." Something flickered across Henry's face, surprise maybe, or grudging respect. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask he wore like armor. The hearing concluded. The commissioners retired to deliberate, and Clara, Elias, Margaret, and the children waited in the cold hallway outside, each lost in their own thoughts about what came next. An hour passed, then 2. Just when Clara thought she couldn't stand the suspense another moment, the door opened. "The commissioners have reached a decision," the clerk announced. "All parties should return to the hearing room." They filed back, in Clara's heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. She took her seat, felt Elias's hand find hers under the table, held on like he was the only thing keeping her anchored. Commissioner Bradshaw cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. This case presented several complex legal questions regarding debt obligations versus inheritance rights, the timeline for asserting claims, and the doctrine of laches. After careful consideration of all arguments and evidence presented, he paused, and in that pause, Clara's entire future hung suspended. "We find in favor of the respondent, Miss Clara Donovan. The claim filed by Mr. Henry McCord is denied, and Miss Donovan's ownership of the disputed property is hereby confirmed and validated." The words hit Clara like a physical force. They'd won. Against all odds, against money and power and corruption, they'd actually won. Beside her, Margaret let out a breath she'd been holding. Behind them, Thomas let out a whoop, quickly stifled by Mary's hand over his mouth. And Elias squeezed her hand so tight it hurt, but Clara didn't care because they'd won. They'd actually won. Henry McCord stood slowly, his face expressionless. He looked at his wife, at his son, at Clara, with her siblings gathered around her. Then without a word, he turned and walked out of the hearing room, his lawyers scrambling to follow. "We did it," Clara whispered, still not quite believing it. "We actually did it."
"You did it," Margaret corrected, her eyes bright with tears. "You stood up there and fought for what was yours, and you won. I'm so proud of you, Clara." They spilled out into the cold Helena afternoon, laughing and crying and holding each other. The children danced in circles, whooping with joy despite not fully understanding what had just happened. Margaret hugged Clara tight. Then Elias, then all 3 of them together. "What happens now?" Clara asked when the initial euphoria had faded enough to think clearly. "Now we go home," Elias said simply. "We go back to that cabin, and we build the life we fought for." "Together," Clara added, looking up at him. "Together," he confirmed. And there in the streets of Helena, with Margaret beaming at them and the children playing in the snow,
Elias McCord kissed Clara Donovan properly for the first time, a kiss full of promise and hope, and the future stretching out bright before them. They'd won the battle, but the real work, building a life, building a family building, something that would last, was just beginning, and they would face it the way they'd faced everything else, together. The journey back to the homestead took 5 days instead of 4, slowed by a storm that caught them in the mountain pass and forced them to shelter in an abandoned mining shack for nearly 24 hours. But even the howling wind and bitter cold couldn't dampen the joy that filled their small group. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against corruption and intimidation, and every advantage Henry McCord could bring to bear, they'd won. Clara kept touching the document Margaret had secured for her, the official ruling from the territorial commissioner stamped and signed, declaring her rightful owner of the Fitzgerald property. She folded and unfolded it so many times during the trip that Margaret finally took it away and sealed it in a waterproof case to protect it. "You'll wear it out before we get home," Margaret said with gentle amusement. "And then where will we be?" "Home," Claire repeated softly, testing the word. "I don't think I've had a real home since before my parents died. Just places we stayed, places we tried to survive. But now it really is home, isn't it? They can't take it away." "Not legally, no. The ruling is binding." But Margaret's expression grew serious. "Clara, I need you to understand something. Just because we won in court doesn't mean Henry will give up. My husband is persistent and vindictive. He doesn't take defeat well. What can he do? The law is on our side now. The law is one thing. What actually happens is another." Margaret stared out at the snow-covered landscape. "He might try to make your life difficult in other ways. He controls a lot of the trade in the valley. He could make it hard for you to sell livestock or crops. He could pressure neighbors not to help you. He could—" "Let him try." Clara's voice was hard as iron. "I didn't come this far, fight this hard, just to be intimidated now. If your husband wants to make things difficult, fine. We'll find a way. We always do." Elias, riding alongside the wagon, heard the exchange and felt a complicated mix of pride and worry. He knew his father knew how Henry's mind worked. The loss in Helena would have been a public humiliation, a blow to his authority in the valley. Men like Henry McCord didn't forgive that kind of defeat. They retaliated. The question was how and when. They reached the homestead on a clear, cold afternoon, the sun bright on the snow-covered land. The cabin stood solid and strong, smoke-free, and waiting exactly as they'd left it. Thomas whooped and jumped down from the wagon before it fully stopped running to check on the chickens they'd left in a neighbor's care. Mary and James followed their voices high with excitement as they explored every corner as if they'd been gone for months instead of weeks. "It looks different," Clara said quietly, standing beside Elias as they surveyed the property. "Or maybe I'm different. But it doesn't feel quite as small or broken as it did before. Because it's not just a cabin anymore. It's your cabin, legally, officially, undeniably yours." Elias smiled at her. "How does that feel? Terrifying, wonderful, real." She turned to face him. "Elias and Helena, when we..." She stumbled over the words, embarrassed despite everything. "I meant it. What I said about not being able to imagine a future without you, but I don't know what happens now. I don't know how this works." "Neither do I." He reached for her hand, linking their fingers together. "But I have some ideas if you're willing to hear them." Before Clara could respond, Margaret called out from where she was helping the children unload supplies. "You two can have that conversation later. Right now we need to get these provisions inside before they freeze." They worked until dark, restocking the cabin, repairing small damages from their absence, making everything secure again. Margaret stayed for dinner, a proper meal of salt pork and beans, enhanced by fresh bread she'd brought from Helena. The children chattered nonstop about the city, about the hearing, about the fancy boarding house with its real beds and glass windows. "Did you see the judge's face when Clara told him we weren't leaving?" Thomas asked, grinning. "He looked like he'd swallowed a hornet." "That wasn't the judge, that was Mr. McCord," Mary corrected. "And you're not supposed to laugh at people even when they're mean." "I'm not laughing at him being mean. I'm laughing at him being wrong." Thomas's expression grew more serious. He thought he could scare us off, thought we'd just run away. But we didn't. No, Clara agreed quietly. We didn't run. We stood our ground and fought back. That's what Donovans do. Little James, who'd been quiet through most of the meal, suddenly spoke up. Are we safe now? Really safe, or are the bad men going to come back? The adults exchanged glances. It was the question none of them wanted to answer directly because the truth was complicated and frightening. We're safer than we were, Elias said carefully. The law is on our side now, and that matters. But James, you need to understand something important. Being safe doesn't mean nothing bad will ever happen. It means we're prepared and careful and we look out for each other. Can you do that? Can you be careful and smart? James nodded solemnly. I can try. That's all anyone can do. Try their best and trust the people who love them. Elias ruffled the boy's hair gently. And you're loved, kiddo. Never doubt that. After the children were settled for the night, the three adults sat around the fire while snow began to fall again outside. Margaret had planned to ride back to the McCord ranch that evening, but the weather made travel dangerous and Clara insisted she stay. Henry will know where I am, Margaret said, accepting a cup of coffee. He's probably known since we left Helena, but you're right, traveling in this weather would be foolish. How bad will it be? Elias asked. When you go back, I mean. How angry is he? Furious, humiliated, probably already plotting his next move. Margaret sighed heavily. I knew there would be consequences when I chose to help you. I'm prepared for them. You shouldn't have to choose between your husband and what's right. No, I shouldn't. But that's the choice he forced by refusing to be reasonable. She looked between Elias and Clara, a small smile playing at her lips despite the serious conversation. You two should know that I'm not doing this just because it's right. I'm doing it because watching you fight for each other for this family, your building it reminds me why I fell in love with Henry in the first place. He used to fight for things too, for justice and fairness. Somewhere along the way, he forgot that. You're helping me remember that it's never too late to stand up for what matters. Thank you, Clara said softly. For everything. For teaching me the law, for standing up to your husband, for believing we were worth fighting for. Oh, Clara, you were always worth fighting for. You just needed someone to show you how to fight back with more than just courage and determination. Margaret set down her coffee cup. Now, there's something we need to discuss. Both of you. The seriousness in her tone made them both straighten. The legal battle is over, but the social battle is just beginning. Henry has influence in this valley that goes beyond money or land. He's cultivated relationships, done favors, created obligations. A lot of people owe him, and he'll call in those debts now to isolate you both. Margaret looked at Elias. Some folks will side with your father just because he's your father, because they think you betrayed family. Others will stay neutral out of fear. You need to be prepared for that. I am prepared. Are you ready for old friends to cross the street rather than speak to you, for business owners to refuse you service, for neighbors you've known your whole life to treat you like a stranger? Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. This is going to be harder than you think, Elias. Social exile is its own kind of warfare. Then we'll survive it the same way we've survived everything else, Clara interjected. Together. We don't need the whole valley on our side, we just need each other. That's a lovely sentiment, but it's not entirely practical. You'll need supplies, trade partners help during busy seasons. You can't operate a homestead in complete isolation. Margaret leaned forward. That's why you need to build your own network. Find the people who aren't under Henry's thumb, who value fairness over power. They're out there. You just need to find them and cultivate those relationships. Like Hoskins at the general store, Elias said thoughtfully. He's always been independent-minded. Exactly. And there are others. The widow Patterson on the West Ridge, the Johnson family who homesteaded last year, the Reverend at the church in Bridger's Crossing. He's a good man who won't be swayed by money or threats. Margaret counted them off. These are your allies. Nurture those friendships. Help them when you can. Build something stronger than Henry's network of obligations and fear. They talked late into the night, planning and strategizing, trying to anticipate Henry's next moves and prepare responses. When Margaret finally retired to sleep on the floor near the fire,
Insisting the children keep the beds, Elias and Clara stepped outside despite the cold and the snow. "Your mother is remarkable," Clara said, pulling her coat tight around herself. "I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like her. She's been waiting a long time to be remarkable again."
My father tried to make her into something quiet and decorative, but that was never who she was. Elias looked up at the sky where stars occasionally appeared between the snow clouds. She studied law when women weren't supposed to want such things. She stood up to him when standing up meant risking everything. She's teaching me what real strength looks like.
"You already knew. You've been teaching me since the day we met." "No, you had it all along. I just reminded you it was there." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about it since Helena, since that night when you kissed me and said you loved me." Clara's heart began to race.
"What about it?" "About what comes next. About us." He took both her hands in his, and even through their gloves, she could feel him trembling slightly. "I know the timing isn't perfect. I know we're in the middle of preparing for whatever my father does next. But I also know that life is uncertain, and tomorrow isn't guaranteed, and I don't want to wait anymore." "Elias, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to marry you. I want to stand up in front of whatever community we can build and promise to love you for the rest of my life. I want to be a husband to you and a father to Thomas and Mary and James. I want to build this homestead into something that lasts, something we can be proud of." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "I want all four of you. Not just as neighbors or friends, but as family. Real family." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "We come with so much complication, so much difficulty. Your father will never accept it. Half the valley will think you're insane." "I don't care what they think. I only care what you think, what you want." He squeezed her hands gently. "So what do you want, Clara Donovan?" She thought about everything that had led to this moment. The journey from Ohio with 3 frightened children and nothing but hope. The broken cabin and the constant struggle to survive. The stranger who'd ridden up to her fence line and offered help when she'd been too proud and too scared to ask for it. The way Elias had stood by them through fire and threats and legal battles, never wavering, never giving up. She thought about his hands teaching Thomas to split wood properly, about the way he read to James at night, his voice steady and soothing, about how he'd encouraged Mary's curiosity and never dismissed her questions, about the way he looked at Clara herself, like she was strong and capable and worthy of love despite all her rough edges and sharp corners. "I want to say yes," she whispered, "but Elias, I'm terrified. Not of you, but of everything. Of failing you, of not being enough of this, not working out the way we hope." "Then be terrified with me, because I'm scared too. Scared I won't be the husband you need, the father those kids deserve. Scared I'll let you down somehow." He lifted one hand to cup her face gently. "But I'm more scared of not trying, of walking away from this because it might be hard. You taught me that the things worth having are worth fighting for, so let me fight for this, for us. Let me fight for the family we can become." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the cold wind on her face, the warmth of Elias's hand against her cheek, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Every practical voice in her head screamed that this was too fast, too complicated, too risky. But her heart, the part of her that had kept her moving forward through loss and grief and endless struggle, knew the truth. She loved him, completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably. And sometimes love meant being brave enough to say yes, even when you were scared. "Yes," she said, opening her eyes to meet his. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry you, and we'll face whatever comes together. And if I'm making a mistake, at least it's the most beautiful mistake I'll ever make." Elias's smile was incandescent. He pulled her close and kissed her deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning despite the cold. "We should tell the children," Clara said. "And your mother, God, your mother. She's going to be thrilled," Elias finished. "She's been hoping for this since Helena, probably before. She sees what we have even when we were too stubborn to admit it." They went back inside to find Margaret still awake, sitting by the fire with a knowing smile on her face. "You said yes, I take it," she asked, looking between their joined hands and flushed faces. "How did you?" Clara started. "Because I'm not blind, dear girl.
I've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Margaret stood and embraced them both. I'm so happy for you, for all of you.
This is exactly right. Even though your husband will be furious, Elias asked, especially because of that. It means you're choosing love over fear, family over politics. That's always the right choice. She pulled back her expression, turning thoughtful. When were you thinking of having the ceremony? I hadn't thought that far ahead, Elias admitted. Soon, though. I don't want to wait. Spring? Margaret suggested. After the worst of winter passes, but before planting season gets too demanding, it gives you time to prepare to build something special for the day. And it gives me time to handle Henry. Handle him how? Clara asked nervously. By reminding him that while he may control much of this valley, he doesn't control me. And he certainly doesn't control love. Margaret's eyes gleamed with determination. Besides a wedding is a public declaration. It's you telling the whole community that you're building something permanent here, something that can't be threatened or intimidated away. That sends a powerful message. They talked until the fire burned low, making plans and dreaming about a future that suddenly seemed possible instead of just desperate hope. When they finally slept, it was with light hearts despite the challenges that surely lay ahead. The children's reaction the next morning was everything Clara could have hoped for. Mary squealed with delight and immediately started planning what she would wear. James wrapped himself around Elias's legs and refused to let go, tears of happiness streaming down his face. And Thomas, serious practical Thomas, looked at Elias with an expression of such profound relief and gratitude that it made Clara's throat tighten. Does this mean you're staying? Thomas asked, his voice cracking slightly. Really staying, not just until things get hard. It means I'm staying forever, Elias confirmed. It means I'm going to be your brother-in-law, which means you're stuck with me whether you like it or not. I like it. Thomas tried to sound casual, but he couldn't hide the smile spreading across his face. Someone needs to teach you how to split wood properly. You still hit it the wrong angle half the time. Then I guess I'd better listen to my teacher, Elias said solemnly, ruffling the boy's hair. Margaret left that afternoon riding back toward the McCord ranch with a determined set to her shoulders. Before she went, she pressed a small leather purse into Clara's hands. For the wedding, she said when Clara tried to refuse. Not charity tradition. My mother gave me money for my wedding, and I'm passing that tradition on to you. Use it for a dress, for flowers, for whatever makes the day special. You've earned something beautiful, Clara. After Margaret's departure, the homestead settled into a new rhythm. The legal victory had lifted a weight Clara hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she could think beyond just survival. She could plan, dream, imagine a future that extended past the next meal or the next threat. Elias moved his things from the barn into the small addition they began building onto the cabin, a proper room with real walls and a door that closed something to preserve propriety until the wedding while still keeping him close for security. Thomas helped with the construction, learning carpentry techniques that would serve him well for years to come. Even Mary got involved, mixing mortar and handing up tools. The work was hard, but it was hopeful work. Building instead of just repairing, growing instead of just surviving. 2 weeks after their return from Helena, they had their first real test of how the valley would respond to their victory and engagement. The annual winter market in Bridger's Crossing brought together homesteaders, ranchers, and townspeople to trade goods and supplies before the worst weather set in. Clara needed seeds for spring planting, and Elias wanted to sell some of the furs he'd trapped to raise money for wedding expenses. They rode into town together on a cold Saturday morning, the children bundled in the wagon bed. Clara's stomach churned with anxiety as they approached the market square. This would be their first public appearance since Helena, the first time they'd face the community as an engaged couple who defied Henry McCord and won. The reception was mixed exactly as Margaret had predicted. Some people greeted them warmly. Hoskins from the general store, the widow Patterson, a few other independent-minded homesteaders who'd never liked Henry's domineering ways. They congratulated Clara on her legal victory and wished the couple happiness, but others turned away deliberately when they approached. Longtime friends of the McCord family crossed the street to avoid conversation. Business owners who'd traded with Elias for years suddenly had nothing he wanted to buy. The marshal, a man Henry had helped elect, watched them with cold, calculating eyes but said nothing. The worst moment came when they encountered Wade Garrett near the livestock pens. Henry's foreman stood with a group of ranch hands, all of them armed despite the peaceful setting. Wade's eyes raked over Clara with undisguised contempt before settling on Elias. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," Wade drawled loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Heard you're planning a wedding. That's real sweet. Marrying yourself to that piece of land along with the girl." "Careful, Wade," Elias said quietly, his hand moving to rest on the pistol at his hip. "That's my fiancée you're talking about." "Fiancée." Wade made the word sound dirty. "Your daddy has a different word for what she is. Starts with a W and rhymes with..." He never finished the sentence. Elias's fist caught him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the mud. The ranch hands immediately tensed hands, moving toward weapons, but Hoskins and several other townspeople stepped forward, creating a barrier. "That's enough," Hoskins said firmly. "This is a peaceful market. Anyone who starts trouble will answer to all of us." Wade climbed to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip murder in his eyes. "You'll pay for that, McCord. You and your whole pretend family. Just wait." "I've been waiting," Elias said coldly. "You and my father have been threatening us for months, so go ahead, Wade. Make your move. Let's see how it works out for you." For a tense moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Wade spat blood into the dirt and walked away, his men following reluctantly. The crowd slowly dispersed, though Clara noticed how many were now watching them with new interest, some with approval, others with concern about the conflict they'd just witnessed. "That was foolish," Clara said quietly once they were alone. "He'll tell your father. This will make things worse." "Things are already as worse as they can get," Elias replied, flexing his bruised knuckles. "And I won't let anyone talk about you that way. Not Wade, not anyone. Your chivalry is going to get you killed. Then I'll die defending something worth defending." He turned to face her. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I'm not fighting for you because I think you can't fight for yourself. I'm fighting beside you because that's what partners do. We stand together. We protect each other. That's what marriage means." Clara felt her anger drain away, replaced by something warmer, deeper. "I'm not used to having someone stand with me. I'm used to standing alone." "I know, but you're not alone anymore. And the sooner both of us accept it, the easier this will be." They completed their trading quickly after that, eager to get home before any more confrontations occurred. On the ride back, Thomas sat up front with Elias, peppering him with questions about fighting techniques and self-defense. Mary and James dozed in the back, exhausted from the excitement. "That man said mean things about Clara," Thomas said quietly. "You hit him for it." "I did." "Was that the right thing to do, or should you have walked away?" Elias considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. Walking away might have been smarter, might have avoided escalation. But Thomas, there are some insults that can't be ignored, some lines that can't be crossed without consequences. Wade crossed that line. Will there be more fights? More confrontations? Probably. Your future brother-in-law isn't very popular right now." Elias glanced at the boy. "Does that scare you?" "A little. But mostly, it makes me want to learn how to fight better, how to protect Clara and Mary and James if something happens." Thomas's jaw set stubbornly. "I'm almost 13, old enough to help defend our family. Your job is to be smart and safe, not to fight grown men." "That's what you said before, but things have changed. We won the legal battle, but the other kind isn't over, is it? The kind where people might get hurt." Elias wished he could lie, could offer the comfort of false promises. But Thomas deserved the truth. "No, it's not over. But Thomas, violence should always be the last resort, never the first response. What matters most is being smart, being prepared, and knowing when to fight and when to get your family to safety. Like you did. You only hit him after he insulted Clara, not before." "Exactly. I gave him chances to walk away. He chose not to take them." Elias smiled slightly. "You're thinking about this the right way. That's good. That's what Clara needs from you, thoughtful strength, not reckless bravery." When they arrived home, they found Margaret waiting with her horse tied outside the cabin. Her expression was grave and Clara's heart sank. "What happened?" Clara asked before even dismounting. "Henry knows about the engagement. Someone from Helena sent word and he's..."
Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. He's angrier than I've seen him in years. He told me I'm not to have any further contact with you or Elias, that I'm choosing between you and him. And, Elias asked quietly, and I told him I choose you. I choose what's right over what's comfortable. Margaret's voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. I've moved out of the main house. I'm staying in the guest cottage on the property for now, but I won't be returning to him unless he apologizes and changes his behavior.
Which means I likely won't be returning at all. Clara felt guilt crash over her. Mrs. McCord, we never meant for you to sacrifice your marriage for us. You didn't sacrifice anything. I chose this. And Clara, you need to understand that my marriage has been dying for years. This situation just forced me to finally admit it and do something about it. Margaret managed a sad smile. Besides, I'd rather live in a cottage alone with my principles intact than in a mansion while compromising everything I believe in. That night, after Margaret had been installed in the new addition, giving up the space to her Elias returned to the barn. Clara stood at the window watching snowfall. Behind her, the children slept soundly. Beside her, though separated by propriety and walls, Elias kept watch from the barn. And somewhere in the valley, Henry McCord plotted his next move. The winter deepened around them, cold and harsh and unforgiving. But inside the cabin, something else was growing. Hope family love strong enough to weather any storm. Clara touched the silver ring Margaret had given her, now hanging on a chain around her neck. Soon she'd wear it on her finger, a symbol of promises made and kept. Soon she'd stand before whatever community they could gather and declare herself bound to Elias McCord for better or worse, in plenty or poverty. And she would mean every word. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern of work and preparation. They reinforced the cabin against the worst of winter's assault, stocking firewood and provisions for the months ahead. Elias hunted when weather permitted, bringing in deer and rabbit to supplement their stores. Thomas became more skilled daily, taking on adult responsibilities with quiet determination. Mary helped Clara begin planning the wedding, sketching dress designs and flower arrangements with touching optimism. And through it all, Clara and Elias stole moments together. Conversations by the fire after the children slept, shared glances across the dinner table, touches that lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. They were building something precious in those moments, something that would form the foundation of their marriage. One evening in late January, as a blizzard raged outside, Margaret gathered them all around the fire to tell stories of her youth. She spoke of her own parents, of growing up in Boston society, where women were expected to be ornamental, of sneaking books about law and politics into her room and reading by candlelight. "My mother caught me once," Margaret said, smiling at the memory. "I was 15 reading Blackstone's commentaries and she walked in. I thought I'd be punished, but instead she sat down and said, 'If you're going to rebel, at least rebel intelligently.' Then she helped me find a tutor who would teach me properly." "What happened to her?" Mary asked. "Your mother?" "She died when I was 20, just before I met Henry. I always wondered what she'd think of the choices I made, the life I built, whether she'd be disappointed." Margaret looked at Clara. "But watching you fight for your family, seeing you stand up in that hearing and demand justice, I think she'd understand. Sometimes we make choices that seem wrong from the outside, but are absolutely right for who we are inside." "Do you regret it?" Clara asked softly. "Marrying Mr. McCord? I regret what he became. I regret not standing up to him sooner, but I don't regret Elias, and I don't regret learning what strength really means." She reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. "You're going to be happy, dear girl. You and my son, you're going to build something beautiful here. I can feel it." The blizzard lasted 3 days, trapping them all inside the cabin in close quarters. It should have been miserable, too many people in too small a space, nothing to do but wait out the storm. But instead, it became something precious. They told stories, played games with pieces of wood and pebbles, taught the children songs Margaret remembered from her youth. Elias carved small wooden animals for James, teaching him the names of each one. Thomas learned to play chess using a board Margaret had brought, his strategic mind-taking to the game immediately. Mary worked on her letters, determined to write invitations to the wedding herself. And Clara, watching her family gathered around the fire, felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the absence of problems, there were still plenty of those waiting outside in the snow. but a deep settled peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged with exactly the people who mattered most. When the blizzard finally broke, they emerged to find the world transformed. Snow had drifted against the cabin in waves, nearly reaching the windows. The barn roof had held, thank God, and the animals inside were safe if hungry. The creek was frozen solid and the trees bent under the weight of ice and snow. "It's beautiful," Mary breathed, standing in the doorway and staring at the pristine landscape. "It's dangerous," Thomas corrected, ever practical. "We'll need to dig out paths, check the fences, make sure nothing collapsed under the weight." "It can be both," Elias said, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. "Beautiful and dangerous. That's Montana for you. That's life, really." They spent the next week digging out, repairing storm damage, and checking on neighbors who might need help. The widow Patterson had lost part of her chicken coop, which Elias and Thomas helped rebuild. The Johnson family had run low on firewood, so they shared from their stores. Small acts of kindness and neighborliness that built the network Margaret had talked about. And slowly word spread about the young couple and their growing family, about how they'd stood up to Henry McCord and won, about how they were building something real on land everyone had written off as cursed, about how they helped others even when they barely had enough themselves. The valley began to take sidelines being drawn in snow and social interaction. Those who valued fairness and courage began to gather around the Donovan homestead. Those who valued power and tradition remained loyal to Henry McCord. It was the beginning of a shift, subtle but real, in the valley's social structure. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures, and the first hints that spring might eventually come. Clara's dress began to take shape, sewn from fabric Margaret had purchased in Helena, simple but beautiful, cream-colored with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was the finest thing Clara had ever owned, and she could barely believe it would be hers. "You'll be a beautiful bride," Margaret said, helping Clara with a fitting. "Elias won't be able to take his eyes off you. He's seen me covered in mud and ash and God knows what else. I don't think a dress will make that much difference. You underestimate the power of seeing someone you love in wedding clothes. It makes everything real in a way it wasn't before." Margaret pinned a hem carefully. "Have you thought about what you'll say? Your vows?" "I assume we'll use traditional words, for better or worse, richer or poorer, all that." "You could. Or you could write your own, say what's really in your heart." Margaret looked up, her eyes gentle. "This is your wedding, Clara. Make it mean something to you and Elias, not just fulfill tradition." Clara thought about that as the days passed and spring drew closer. What would she say to Elias standing before whatever community they could gather? How could she put into words what he meant to her, what they'd built together, what she hoped they'd become? The answer came to her one morning as she watched him teaching James to whittle his patience infinite, his hands steady and sure as he guided the child's smaller hands. She would promise to stand with him, to fight beside him, to build a life worth living together. Simple words, true words, the only words that mattered. March arrived with mud and melting snow and the first brave shoots of green pushing through the frozen earth. Spring was coming, and with it, Clara's wedding day. The date was set for the first Saturday in April, when the weather should be clear enough for travel and the land would be waking from winter's sleep. Invitations went out hand-delivered by Thomas and Mary to the families they'd identified as allies: the widow Patterson, the Johnsons, Hoskins from the general store, Reverend Mitchell from Bridger's Crossing, and a few others who'd proven themselves friends. They would have a small wedding, Margaret explained, but a meaningful one. Quality over quantity. The week before the ceremony, Henry McCord made his final play. Papers were delivered by a territorial marshal, a lawsuit claiming that Elias, as Henry's son and heir, had taken property belonging to the McCord estate when he moved to the Donovan homestead. Tools livestock supplies, Henry was demanding either their return or financial compensation. It was petty and vindictive and legally questionable. But it was also expensive to fight, and it sent a clear message. Henry McCord would never stop. He would never forgive. He would use every tool at his disposal to punish those who defied him. Elias read the papers with a calm expression that didn't quite hide the anger and hurt beneath. "He's claiming the horse is his. Dusty, who I raised from a foal. who I've worked with for 8 years. His voice was flat. And the tools I made myself in the ranch workshop. Even the clothes on my back, apparently. What do we do? Clara asked, feeling the familiar fear creeping back in. We ignore it, Margaret said firmly, reading over the documents. This lawsuit has no merit. Any judge worth his salt will see it's just harassment. Henry's hoping to intimidate you to drain your resources fighting it. Don't give him the satisfaction. But if we ignore it, he could get a default judgment. Then I'll represent you. I'll file a response pointing out exactly how frivolous this is. I'll make it clear that if Henry wants to pursue this, he'll look petty and vindictive in front of the entire territorial legal system. Margaret's smile was sharp. Your father may have power, Elias, but he also has pride. He won't want to be the laughingstock of Helena. The lawsuit was answered, challenged, and ultimately dismissed by a territorial judge who clearly saw it for the harassment it was. But the damage was done. Everyone in the valley now knew exactly how far Henry McCord was willing to go to punish his son, and they had to choose which side they were on. The day before the wedding, Clara woke to find the homestead transformed. While she'd slept, friends had arrived and decorated wildflowers wound around the porch posts. Ribbons hung from the barn, a bower of pine boughs erected near the creek where the ceremony would take place. The widow Patterson had brought pies. The Johnsons contributed a dressed turkey. Hoskins arrived with bottles of wine and cider. Reverend Mitchell came early to review the ceremony and bless the house. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fancy, but it was real and genuine and filled with love. That night, Clara stood outside alone looking at the stars. Tomorrow she would become a wife. Tomorrow she would promise her life to Elias McCord. Tomorrow, everything would change. Having second thoughts, Margaret's voice came from behind her. Third and fourth thoughts, probably. Clara smiled. But not about Elias, about whether I deserve this, whether I'm enough. Oh, my dear girl, you're more than enough. You're exactly what Elias needs, someone strong enough to stand beside him, brave enough to face anything, stubborn enough to never give up. Margaret moved to stand beside her. Tomorrow, when you speak your vows, remember that you're not just marrying my son. You're declaring to the entire valley that love is stronger than power, that family is more than blood, that some things are worth any cost. No pressure then? Clara said wryly. Margaret laughed. Just be yourself. That's all Elias has ever wanted. That's all any of us need you to be. Inside the cabin, the children were already asleep, exhausted from helping prepare for tomorrow. Thomas in his corner, Mary and James curled together in the loft. Her family, her responsibility, her joy. Tomorrow that family would grow by one more, and Clara, despite all her fears and doubts, couldn't wait. Dawn broke clear and bright on the first Saturday in April, the kind of Montana morning that promised warmth after months of bitter cold. Clara woke before the sun fully cleared the mountains, her heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and terror that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Today she would marry Elias McCord. Margaret was already awake, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. She smiled when she saw Clara emerge from behind the curtain they'd hung for privacy. Couldn't sleep either, Margaret asked softly, careful not to wake the children still slumbering in the loft. Too much in my head. Too many feelings. Clara accepted the cup of coffee Margaret poured, wrapping her cold hands around the warmth. Is this normal? This feeling like your heart might burst right out of your chest? Perfectly normal. I felt the same way the morning I married Henry. Margaret's expression grew distant for a moment. I was so certain then that we'd build something beautiful together, so full of hope. She shook herself, returning to the present. But that was a different time, a different marriage. Yours will be different, Clara. Better. Because you and Elias are starting from a foundation of real partnership, real equality. That's something Henry and I never had. They sat together in the pre-dawn quiet, sipping coffee and watching the sky lighten. Outside, Elias would be waking in the barn, probably as nervous as Clara herself. The thought made her smile despite her anxiety. Steady, confident Elias reduced to wedding day jitters, just like any other groom. I should check on him, Clara said suddenly.
Make sure he hasn't changed his mind and ridden off into the territory. He's not going anywhere. That man would walk through fire for you. Margaret's eyes twinkled. But it's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony. That's just superstition. Perhaps. But why tempt fate? Margaret began pulling ingredients for breakfast. Besides, you have enough to do getting yourself ready. The children need to be fed and dressed. Your hair needs doing, and that dress isn't going to lace itself. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Mary woke first squealing with excitement when she remembered what day it was. She bounded into James's bed, shaking him awake, both of them chattering about the wedding while Thomas groaned and pulled his blanket over his head. "Too early," he mumbled. "Sun's barely up." "It's Clara's wedding day, so," Mary insisted. "We have to help her get ready." That got Thomas moving. He sat up, his hair sticking in all directions, and looked at Clara with an expression that was far too serious for a boy his age. "You're really doing this, really marrying Elias?" "I am. Does that worry you?" "No, I just..." He struggled to find the words. "I want to make sure you're marrying him because you want to, not because you think you have to. Not because we need him." Clara crossed to where Thomas sat and took both his hands in hers. "Listen to me. Yes, we needed help. Yes, Elias provided that help. But Thomas, I'm not marrying him out of obligation or gratitude. I'm marrying him because I love him, because he makes me laugh even when things are hard, because he treats you and Mary and James like you're precious, because when I imagine the future, I can't imagine it without him in it." She squeezed his hands gently. "Is that enough reason?" Thomas's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Yeah, that's enough." He pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm happy for you, Clara. Really happy. You deserve this. We all deserve this. A real family, a real home, a real chance at happiness." She held him close for another moment, then pulled back. "Now go get yourself cleaned up. You're walking me down the aisle, remember? Can't do that looking like you slept in a hay pile." "I basically did sleep in a hay pile," Thomas pointed out, but he was grinning as he scrambled down from the loft. Breakfast was a chaotic affair with everyone talking at once, making plans, stealing bites of food between tasks. The widow Patterson arrived mid-morning with her daughters to help with preparations. They shooed Elias out when he tried to sneak in for more coffee, laughing at his protests. "Bad luck," the widow called out. "You'll see your bride soon enough, young man. Now, off with you." Elias caught Clara's eye through the window as he retreated, and the look on his face, equal parts love and nervous anticipation, made Clara's heart skip. By early afternoon, the homestead had filled with guests, not as many as a McCord wedding might have drawn in better times, but enough. Hoskins from the general store arrived with his wife and 3 boys. The Johnson family came in their Sunday best, their wagon loaded with food contributions. Reverend Mitchell rode up on his elderly mule, his Bible tucked under his arm. A few other homesteading families Clara had met through Margaret made the journey along with several townspeople from Bridger's Crossing who'd proven themselves friends. 30 people, maybe 35. A small gathering by some standards. But to Clara, who'd spent so long feeling alone and isolated, it looked like a crowd. "They came," she whispered to Margaret, watching from the cabin window. "Even knowing it might anger your husband, they came. They came because they believe in what you and Elias are building, because they're tired of Henry's bullying and ready to support an alternative." Margaret began helping Clara into her wedding dress, the cream fabric settling around her like a dream. "You're not just getting married today, Clara. You're making a statement. You're showing the valley that there's another way to live, another kind of power than the one Henry wields." The dress fit perfectly, the embroidery at collar and cuffs catching the light. Margaret had loaned Clara a pearl necklace, simple but elegant, and woven wildflowers into her hair. When Clara finally looked at herself in the small mirror Margaret produced, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy, hopeful, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fancy clothes and everything to do with the joy radiating from within. "Oh, Clara," Mary breathed from the doorway. "You look like a princess." "I look like me, just a fancier version." But Clara couldn't stop smiling. "Is everyone ready?" "Elias is already at the bower," Thomas reported, peeking in behind Mary. "He's wearing a suit, a real suit. I didn't even know he owned one." "Margaret brought it from the ranch," Clara said.
one of his father's old ones altered to fit. She said every groom should have something fine to wear on his wedding day. Thomas offered Clara his arm with exaggerated formality. Then I guess we shouldn't keep him waiting. Ready? Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of her life, the choice that couldn't be undone or walked back, and she'd never been more certain of anything. I'm ready. They processed from the cabin to the bower erected near the creek, Thomas solemn at Clara's side, Mary and James walking ahead scattering wildflower petals, Margaret following behind as matron of honor. The assembled guests stood as Clara passed, their faces warm with genuine happiness. But Clara only had eyes for the man waiting at the bower. Elias stood in dappled sunlight, the suit making him look older, more formal, but his eyes were the same, full of wonder and love and barely contained emotion. As Clara approached, she saw his hands trembling slightly at his sides, saw him swallow hard, saw the moment when he truly registered that this was real. This was happening, she was choosing him. Thomas placed Clara's hand in Elias's, his voice thick as he whispered, "Take care of her, please." "With my life," Elias promised, and Thomas nodded satisfied before stepping back to stand with his siblings. Reverend Mitchell opened his Bible, began speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bonds of marriage. The words washed over Clara like water, familiar and strange at once. She heard them without really listening, too focused on Elias's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and miraculous. "The couple has chosen to speak their own vows," Reverend Mitchell said, and Clara's attention snapped back to the present. "Elias, you may begin." Elias took both of Clara's hands in his, and when he spoke, his voice carried clear and strong across the gathered assembly. "Clara Donovan, I didn't know what I was looking for until I found you. I thought I knew what my life would be, following in my father's footsteps, building an empire, accumulating land and wealth and power. But then I rode up to a broken cabin and met a woman who showed me that real strength has nothing to do with how much you own and everything to do with how much you're willing to fight for what matters." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "You taught me that family isn't always blood, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and the strongest thing you can do is accept it. I promise to stand beside you for the rest of my life, to be a partner, not a protector, a husband and a father to Thomas and Mary and James, to build with you, fight with you, dream with you, to choose you every day in every way for as long as I'm breathing." Clara's vision blurred with tears. She'd known Elias loved her, but hearing him speak those words in front of everyone who mattered, declaring his commitment so openly and completely, it overwhelmed her in the best possible way. "Clara," Reverend Mitchell prompted gently, "your vows." She took a shaky breath, gripping Elias's hands like they were the only thing keeping her anchored. The words she'd practiced fled her mind, but it didn't matter. She knew what she needed to say. "Elias McCord, 6 months ago, I was alone and terrified and trying to hold together a family with nothing but stubbornness and pride. Then a stranger rode up to my fence line and offered help I was too scared to accept. You could have ridden away, probably should have, but you stayed. You kept coming back. You stood between me and every threat, every danger, every attempt to break us. Not because you thought I was weak, but because you understood that strength doesn't mean standing alone, it means knowing when to stand together." Her voice grew stronger, surer. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to love you not just when it's easy, but when it's hard, to build a life with you that our children, all 4 of them, can be proud of, to never stop fighting for us, for this family, for the future we're creating together. I choose you, Elias, today and every day after, for better or worse, in plenty or poverty, until my last breath. Then, by the power vested in me by Montana Territory," Reverend Mitchell said, smiling broadly, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride." Elias pulled Clara close and kissed her while the assembled guests cheered and applauded. It was a kiss full of promise and hope and the joy of finally being able to claim each other openly. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools' faces, flushed hands still clasped tight. "Mrs. McCord," Elias said softly, testing out the name. Clara Donovan McCord, she corrected. I'm keeping part of my name. My parents gave it to me, and I'm not letting it go. Clara Donovan McCord. Elias repeated, his smile widening. Perfect. You're perfect. The celebration that followed was exactly what Clara had hoped for, simple, joyful, full of genuine warmth. Tables had been set up near the cabin, groaning under the weight of food everyone had contributed. There was music from a fiddle player Hoskins had brought dancing on the packed earth, children running wild with excitement, and sugar from the cakes the widow Patterson had baked. Mary appointed herself dance coordinator, dragging adults onto the makeshift dance floor whether they wanted to go or not. James clung to Elias's leg for most of the afternoon, occasionally venturing out to play with the other children, but always returning to his new father's side. Thomas stood a bit apart, trying to look grown up and dignified, but Clara caught him grinning when he thought no one was watching. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elias pulled Clara aside from the celebration. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. A wedding gift. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it. He pressed a small wooden box into her hands. Clara opened it to find a silver ring, simple, unadorned, but beautifully crafted. Inscribed on the inside were words in careful script, strength in standing together. Elias, she breathed. It's beautiful. How did you? I've been working on it for weeks. Late at night when you were asleep. Asked the blacksmith in town to help with the inscription. He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger next to the sapphire ring Margaret had given her. I know we're not rich. I know I can't give you fancy things or an easy life, but I can give you this, a promise that whatever comes, we face it together. That's our strength. That's what makes us unbeatable. Clara threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face against his shoulder to hide the tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't need fancy things. I just need you. I just need this family, this life, this impossible, beautiful thing we're building. Then you have everything, Elias murmured against her hair, because I'm not going anywhere. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the celebration continued around them, as the sun painted the world in colors too beautiful for words, as their future spread out before them full of possibility. But not everyone was celebrating. The sound of approaching horses cut through the music and laughter. The fiddle player stopped mid-song. Conversations died. Everyone turned to watch as 3 riders crested the ridge and headed toward the homestead at a deliberate pace. Henry McCord rode in the center, flanked by Wade Garrett and another ranch hand Clara didn't recognize. They were armed, though their weapons remained holstered. They weren't here to fight, not yet anyway. But their presence alone was a threat, a reminder that Henry hadn't forgotten or forgiven. The wedding guests immediately tensed. Several men moved closer to their families, hands dropping to their own weapons. The widow Patterson pulled her daughters behind her. Hoskins positioned himself near Reverend Mitchell, ready to protect the older man if necessary. But Clara stepped forward before anyone could react, moving to stand at the edge of the gathering with Elias at her side and Margaret just behind them. She wasn't going to let Henry McCord ruin this day. Not now, not ever. Henry dismounted slowly, his eyes sweeping over the assembled crowd with barely concealed contempt. Then his gaze settled on Elias, on Clara, on the rings glinting on their fingers, and something complicated flickered across his face. Anger, hurt, regret, pride all tangled together. Father, Elias said quietly, you're not welcome here. We've done nothing to invite you, and you're trespassing on private property. I came to talk, Henry said, his voice rough. That's all, just talk. You've made your position clear through lawsuits and harassment and threats. I don't think we have anything left to say to each other. Perhaps not, but your mother asked me to come. Begged me, actually, said I'd regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't at least try. Henry's eyes shifted to Margaret, and for just a moment the hardness in his expression cracked. She said I was losing my son over pride and stubbornness. That I was throwing away the best thing I'd ever had the fortune to create. She's right, Margaret said, stepping forward to stand between her husband and son. Henry, look at what you're doing. Look at what this feud is costing you. Your son, your reputation, your own humanity. Is it really worth it? Is winning really more important than family? He chose them over us. Henry's voice cracked like a whip. He threw away everything I built, everything I planned for him for strangers, for a piece of land that should have been ours. No, Clara said, her voice ringing clear and strong. He chose what was right over what was easy. He chose to help people who needed help instead of taking from them. He chose to be a better man than you've become. She moved to stand directly in front of Henry, unafraid despite the anger radiating from him. You see us as a threat, Mr. McCord, as something that took your son from you. But the truth is you drove him away yourself. With your greed, your cruelty, your inability to see people as anything other than obstacles or assets. Elias didn't leave you. You left the man you used to be, the man your son could respect, the man your wife fell in love with. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see how Henry would react to being spoken to so directly, so fearlessly. For a long moment, he just stared at Clara with those cold, calculating eyes. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. The anger didn't disappear, but something else appeared alongside it. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. You're brave, I'll give you that, Henry said quietly. Foolish, probably, but brave. He turned back to Elias. Your mother is leaving me. Did you know that she's filed for legal separation, something I never thought she'd have the courage to do? She says she can't be married to a man who values land over love, power over family. Then she's braver than I gave her credit for, Elias said. She is. She always has been. I just stopped seeing it. Henry took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice held something that might have been pain. I built an empire, Elias. I took raw land and made it valuable. I created something that should have lasted generations. But standing here now, watching you with your new family, seeing how they look at you like you hung the moon and stars, I'm wondering what the hell it was all for. What good is an empire if there's no one to share it with? What good is winning if you lose everything that matters along the way? Are you asking for forgiveness? Elias asked carefully. Because if you are, you need to understand what that means. It means accepting Clara and the children as family. It means no more threats, no more harassment, no more attempts to drive them off their land. It means actually changing, not just saying words you think I want to hear. I don't know if I can change. I've been this way too long, built too much of my life on being the hardest, the strongest, the one who never backs down. Henry's shoulders sagged slightly. But I know I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting my own son. I can't keep losing pieces of myself in pursuit of more land, more power, more of everything I thought mattered. Margaret moved to her husband's side, and in that moment, Clara saw what they must have been like years ago. Two people who'd loved each other fiercely before the world wore them down. Margaret took Henry's hand, her voice soft but firm. This is your chance to be the man I married again. The man who believed in fairness and justice, who built things instead of just taking them. The man who would have been proud of what Elias has become. She gestured to the assembled guests, the simple celebration, the love evident in every corner. Look at what our son built, Henry. Look at the family he's creating, the community he's gathering. This is worth more than all the land in Montana. Can you see that? Can you finally understand? Henry was quiet for a long time, his eyes moving over the scene, the decorated bower, the tables of food, the children playing the homestead that stood solid and strong despite everything he'd done to break it down. Finally, his gaze settled on little James, who had ventured close enough to stare up at him with wide, curious eyes. You one of the kids? Henry asked gruffly. James nodded. I'm James. That's my sister Mary, and that's my brother Thomas, and that's Clara who takes care of us. And now Elias is our brother too because he married Clara. Your brother-in-law, Elias corrected gently, but James shook his head stubbornly. Brother, that's what you said. That you'd be our family, our brother and our father both. That's what you promised. The boy's voice was absolutely certain. Something broke in Henry's expression. He knelt slowly, bringing himself eye level with James, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He couldn't quite contain. Your sister Clara is right. I've been a hard man, a cruel man sometimes. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who didn't deserve it. I told myself it was necessary, that it was business, that sentiment was weakness. He paused, visibly struggling. But looking at you, at your family, at what my son chose over my empire, maybe sentiment isn't weakness. Maybe it's the only thing that really matters. Does that mean you'll stop being mean? James asked with a child's directness. Because Clara says mean people are just scared people who forgot how to be kind. Henry actually laughed, a short bark of surprised sound. Smart woman, your sister. Scary smart. He stood, his eyes finding Clara's across the space between them. I came here intending to offer you money. One last attempt to buy you out to make this problem go away. But you don't want money, do you? You never did. No, Clara confirmed. I want a home. A real home where my family is safe and loved and has a chance to grow into who they're meant to be. That's all I've ever wanted. Then you've won. Completely, thoroughly won. Not just the legal battle, but the moral one. The one that actually matters. Henry reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. This is the deed to the northern section of my land, 200 acres that connect to your property, including the creek and water rights I've been fighting over. I'm giving it to you, a wedding gift. Call it an apology, call it reparations, call it whatever you want. It's yours. The assembled guests gasped collectively. Elias looked stunned. Even Margaret seemed surprised by this gesture. I don't understand, Clara said slowly. Why would you do this? After everything. Because my wife is right. Because my son deserves better than a father consumed by greed and pride. Because maybe if I give enough, if I try hard enough, there might still be time to salvage something of the man I used to be. Henry held out the deed. Take it. Build your family. Create something beautiful here. And maybe someday, if I prove myself worthy of it, you'll let an old fool be part of it. Not the patriarch demanding obedience, but just family. Elias took the deed with shaking hands, staring at his father with an expression that cycled through disbelief, hope, and cautious joy. Father, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. I haven't earned words. I've barely earned the chance to try. Henry looked around at the gathered crowd, at the people who'd stood with Clara and Elias against him. I've been wrong about a lot of things, and I'm asking, not demanding, but asking for the chance to make it right. The widow Patterson spoke up from the crowd, her voice sharp. Words are easy, Henry McCord. We've all heard pretty words before. What we need is action, proof that you mean what you say. You're right, and I'm prepared to offer that proof. Henry pulled more papers from his coat. I've signed agreements to forgive debts I've been holding over several families in this valley. The Johnsons, the Pattersons, the Mitchells, you're all free of the obligations I've used to control you. Consider them paid, no strings attached. The reaction was immediate and emotional. Mrs. Johnson burst into tears. The widow Patterson covered her mouth with her hand. Reverend Mitchell looked heavenward as if in prayer. Additionally, Henry continued, I'm establishing a cooperative for homesteaders in the valley. Shared resources, shared labor, during busy seasons, fair prices for supplies bought in bulk. It'll be run by elected members, not by me. I'll contribute capital and land access, but I won't control it. That power belongs to the community.
Why? Elias asked, still struggling to believe what he was hearing. Why now, after all this time? Because I'm tired, son. Tired of fighting, tired of being the villain, tired of waking up in an empty house because I drove everyone I love away. Henry's voice broke slightly. I'm 60 years old. I've accumulated more wealth and land than 10 men could use. And for what? So I can die alone, bitter with an empire no one wants to inherit because I made it toxic with my own greed. He shook his head. Your mother is right. You're right. Even this young woman I tried so hard to break is right. There's more to life than winning, and I'd rather spend whatever years I have left trying to be better than die, knowing I wasted it all on being powerful. Margaret moved close to Henry and took his hand, tears streaming down her face. In that gesture, Clara saw the possibility of healing of a marriage that might be saved if both people were willing to do the hard work. This doesn't fix everything, Elias said carefully. We've all been hurt. Trust has been broken. That takes time to rebuild. I know. I'm not asking for instant forgiveness or for everything to go back to how it was. I'm just asking for a chance, for the opportunity to prove that people can change, that it's never too late to choose differently. Henry looked directly at his son. I'm proud of you, Elias.
proud of the man you've become, the family you're building, the stand you've taken. I should have said it months ago, should have said it years ago. But I'm saying it now. You're a better man than I ever was, and I'm grateful for it." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with years of unspoken conflict and hurt. Then slowly Elias stepped forward and embraced his father. It was awkward at first, stiff with unfamiliarity and residual anger. But gradually it softened, became real, became the embrace of a son and father trying to find their way back to each other. When they pulled apart, both men had tears on their faces, and Clara realized she was crying too, along with half the assembled guests. "This doesn't mean everything is perfect," Elias said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have a lot to work through, a lot of conversations to have, a lot of trust to rebuild." "I know, but it's a start." Henry turned to Clara. "I owe you an apology as well, Mrs. McCord. I've done things I'm ashamed of. Threatened you and your family, tried to drive you from land that was rightfully yours, caused you fear and hardship you didn't deserve. I can't take those actions back, but I can commit to being better going forward, to treating you with the respect you've earned." Clara studied this man who'd been her enemy for so long, searching for signs that this was another manipulation, another scheme. But all she saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse, the face of someone who'd finally realized the cost of their choices. "I accept your apology, Mr. McCord, and I appreciate the gesture of the land and the debt forgiveness. But you're right that actions matter more than words. So here's what I need from you, not for me, but for the whole valley. I need you to use your influence to build up this community instead of tearing it down. Help new homesteaders instead of driving them out. Create opportunities instead of obligations. Be the kind of man whose legacy is measured in lives improved rather than land accumulated." "That's fair, more than fair." Henry managed a small smile. "You're going to be good for my son. Hell, you're good for all of us. The valley needs more people like you, people who fight for what's right instead of what's profitable." Wade Garrett, who'd been sitting on his horse the entire time, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "Boss, we heading back, or—" "Yes, Wade, we're leaving. These folks have a celebration to get back to, and we've interrupted enough." Henry swung back up into his saddle, then paused and looked down at the assembled crowd. "Thank you for letting me speak my piece. I hope to earn the right to attend future gatherings, to be part of this community in a better way than I have been. But that's for all of you to decide in your own time." As the three riders turned to leave, James suddenly ran forward, calling out, "Mr. McCord, wait!" Henry pulled up his horse, looking down at the small boy. "Yes, son. If you're being nice now, does that mean you're Elias's dad again? Does that make you sort of like our grandpa?" The question clearly caught Henry off guard. He looked at James, then at Clara and Elias, then back at the boy. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I suppose it does, if that's all right with your sister and your new brother-in-law. Being a grandpa sounds nice. I've never had grandchildren before." "You have to come to dinner sometimes then," James declared with absolute authority. "That's what grandpas do. They come to dinner and tell stories and teach you things." "I'd be honored," Henry said softly, "if I'm invited." "You're invited," Clara heard herself saying, surprising even herself. "Not next week or even next month. We need time. But yes, eventually you're invited. Because family, even complicated, messy, difficult family, is still family. And we believe in second chances here." Henry nodded, clearly overcome. Then he rode away, Wade and the other ranch hand following, leaving behind a crowd of stunned, emotional people trying to process what had just happened. The moment they disappeared over the ridge, the widow Patterson spoke up. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see the day Henry McCord admitted he was wrong about anything." "Do you think he means it?" someone else asked. "Or is this just another scheme?" "Time will tell," Reverend Mitchell said thoughtfully. "But I choose to believe in the possibility of redemption. If we don't believe people can change, what hope is there for any of us?" The conversation bubbled up around them, everyone having opinions about what had just transpired. But Clara only had attention for the man beside her. Her husband, she reminded herself with a thrill of joy and the look of tentative hope on his face. "Did that really just happen?" Elias asked quietly. "Or am I dreaming?" "If you're dreaming, we're all having the same dream." Clara squeezed his hand.
Your father just gave us land, forgave community debts, and asked for a second chance, and somehow, impossibly, it felt genuine. He meant it. I could tell. I've seen him lie enough times to know when he's being truthful. Elias pulled Clara close, resting his forehead against hers. We did it. Not just won the legal battle or survived his attempts to drive us out. We actually changed him, changed the whole valley, maybe. We didn't do anything except refuse to become what he wanted us to be. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is just being yourself and standing firm. Clara smiled up at him. Besides, this is our wedding day. We can save profound thoughts about community transformation for tomorrow. Right now, I just want to dance with my husband. Your husband, Elias repeated, grinning. I'm never going to get tired of hearing that. The fiddle player struck up a new tune and the celebration resumed with even more enthusiasm than before. The confrontation with Henry, rather than dampening spirits, seemed to have energized everyone. It felt like a turning point, like something significant had shifted in the valley's future. Elias led Clara onto the makeshift dance floor, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. Around them, other couples joined in, Margaret dancing with Hoskins, the widow Patterson, with Reverend Mitchell, even Thomas mustering the courage to ask one of the Johnson girls to dance, his face bright red with embarrassment. Look at them, Clara said, watching her family, her expanded, complicated, beautiful family enjoying the moment. 6 months ago, I was alone and terrified and certain I'd fail. Now look at us. Now you have a husband, a mother-in-law who adores you, a father-in-law who's trying to make amends, 3 children who are safe and loved, and an entire community willing to stand with you. Elias spun her gently. And 200 more acres of land, which means we can actually expand, maybe raise cattle or horses, build something sustainable. We can plan all that tomorrow. Tonight, I just want to be happy. Is that allowed? Can I just be purely, simply happy for one night? You can be happy every night for the rest of your life if I have anything to say about it. Elias dipped her dramatically, making her laugh. That's my job now, making you happy, taking care of you and the kids, building a life worth living. Then you're already succeeding, Clara said, letting him pull her back up and into his arms. Because I can't remember the last time I felt this light, this hopeful, this certain that everything is going to be all right. They danced until the sun set, and lanterns were lit around the homestead, casting everything in warm, golden light. The children eventually wore themselves out and fell asleep in various corners. James in Margaret's lap, Mary with her head on the widow Patterson's shoulder. Thomas trying valiantly to stay awake, but losing the battle. As the last guest departed, offering congratulations and well wishes, Clara and Elias stood at the edge of the homestead, looking at everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd won. Ready to start our married life? Elias asked, wrapping his arms around Clara from behind. I think we started it months ago when you first rode up and decided to help a stubborn woman who didn't want help. Clara leaned back against him, feeling safe and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. This is just making it official. Then officially, Mrs. Clara Donovan McCord, I love you. With everything I am, with everything I have, with everything I hope to become. Officially, Mr. Elias McCord, I love you too. And I'm grateful every single day that you were foolish enough to keep coming back even when I told you to leave. They stood together under the Montana stars, listening to the creek murmur past, feeling the solid ground beneath their feet, ground that was theirs, legally and morally earned through courage and determination and refusal to give up. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Inside, Margaret was settling the children into their beds, singing a soft lullaby that drifted out through the windows. The barn stood solid and strong. The new addition that would serve as Clara and Elias's room waited ready to become the private space where they'd build the intimate side of their marriage. Everything was imperfect. Nothing was ideal. There would be hard times ahead, difficult harvests, harsh winters, the ongoing work of rebuilding trust with Henry and navigating the valley's complex social dynamics. There would be arguments and struggles and moments when they questioned their choices, but they would face all of it together. That was the promise they'd made, the vow they'd spoken. Together for better or worse, in plenty or poverty, until their last breath. And somehow, impossibly, that promise made everything feel not just possible, but inevitable. They would succeed because they refused to fail. They would thrive because they knew how to fight. They would build something beautiful because they understood what really mattered. Love, family, home. The simple, profound things that made life worth living.
Come on, Elias said, taking Clara's hand. Let's get the kids properly tucked in, say goodnight to my mother, and start our first night as husband and wife. All four of us, Clara added with a smile. Don't forget you married all four of us. Thomas and Mary and James are part of this package. All four of you, Elias confirmed, pulling her close for a kiss. That was always the deal. That was always what I wanted. A ready-made family with a woman brave enough to build a life from nothing, and 3 kids who needed a father as much as I needed to be one. They walked hand in hand toward the cabin, toward the light and warmth and family waiting inside. Behind them, the Montana Territory stretched vast and wild and full of promise. Before them, a lifetime of moments just like this one, simple, precious, perfect in their imperfection. The story that had started with a stranger at a fence line was now written in land deeds and wedding vows and rebuilt cabins, an expanded acreage in a community slowly healing from years of one man's domination. It was a story about courage and love and the radical act of choosing hope, even when hope seemed foolish. But most of all, it was a story about family, not the family you're born into, but the family you create through choice and commitment and the daily work of showing up for each other. And as Clara stepped across the threshold of her home with her husband beside her and her siblings sleeping safe inside, she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. This was the life she'd fought for, the future she'd barely dared to dream about. She was home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. And it was everything.